My parents always called me the dumb one while my sister got a full ride to Harvard. On her graduation day, my dad stood in front of 200 people and announced she would inherit everything: a brand new Tesla and a $17 million mansion. I was sitting in the back, quietly taking the humiliation, like I always did, until a stranger walked in, handed me an envelope, and whispered that it was time to show them who I really am. My name is Aaliyah. I am 29 years old and sitting here in my penthouse, looking out over the city skyline with a glass of bourbon in my hand. I can finally tell the story of how I completely destroyed their toxic empire. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever been the black sheep of your family and had to prove your worth to people who only wanted to see you fail. The sun was blindingly bright against the pristine white columns of my parents' $17 million estate in Atlanta. It was the epitome of what my father Desmond called black excellence. Caterers carried trays of expensive appetizers past a massive ice sculpture carved into the shape of a medical caduceus. The air smelled of roasted meats and expensive floral arrangements, a heavy perfume meant to mask the reality of who these people truly were behind closed doors. My sister Jada was the guest of honor. She had just finished at Harvard Medical School, or so everyone was told, and my parents were determined to make sure every wealthy, influential family in the city knew about it. They wanted everyone to believe we were the absolute picture of flawless wealth and untouchable prestige, a shining example for the entire community. The backyard was packed with local politicians, doctors, and lawyers, all dressed in designer clothes, sipping expensive champagne. I stood near the back by the catering tent, wearing a simple dress I had bought 3 years ago. I did not fit the aesthetic. I was the college dropout, the girl who quit her junior year to build what my mother called a stupid computer hobby. My father tapped his spoon against a crystal champagne flute. The sharp ringing sound cut through the chatter, and the crowd turned toward the grand staircase where he stood. He was wearing a custom-tailored suit, looking every bit the successful patriarch he desperately wanted to be. Jada stood next to him in a stunning designer gown, glowing under the adoration of the crowd. "Thank you all for coming today," my father's voice boomed over the outdoor sound system. "We are gathered here to celebrate the pinnacle of success." When I look at my daughter Jada, I see the future. I see the manifestation of hard work, brilliance, and the unbroken legacy of our family. She is going to save lives. She is going to change the world. She is everything a parent could ever dream of. The crowd erupted into applause. Jada smiled, perfectly practicing the humble yet entitled look she had mastered since childhood. My mother Vivian stood nearby, dabbing imaginary tears from her eyes. My father raised his hands to quiet the guests. "Excellence, like this, deserves to be rewarded," he continued, his voice swelling with pride. "Jada, your mother and I have decided that upon our retirement, this estate will be signed over entirely to you. You are the only one capable of maintaining the standard of this family. And to make sure you arrive at your new residency in style, look at the driveway." The crowd parted, and the catering staff pulled back a large tarp to reveal a brand new custom model Tesla wrapped in a giant red bow. People gasped and clapped louder. Jada shrieked with joy and hugged my father tightly. I watched from the shadows, feeling a familiar hollow ache in my chest. It was not about the car or the house. It was the public declaration that I was officially erased from their future. I was the mistake they had to sweep under the rug. Then my father's eyes scanned the crowd and landed on me. The warm, proud smile on his face vanished, replaced by a look of sheer annoyance. He did not put the microphone down. "Aaliyah," he said, his voice echoing across the lawn for every single guest to hear. "I need you to go out front and move your car immediately. You parked that beat-up sedan right next to the valet stand. It is ruining the entire aesthetic of the event and blocking the caterers." The music had stopped. 200 pairs of eyes shifted from the shiny new Tesla to me, the stain on their perfect day. I could feel the heat rising in my cheeks as the wealthy guests stared with a mixture of pity and disdain. A few of her friends snickered. My mother gave me a sharp, disappointed glare from across the grass, mouthing the words, "Go do it now." I had spent my entire life shrinking myself to make room for her giant ego. When I showed an aptitude for coding at 15, they told me it was a waste of time and forced me into pre-law classes I hated. When my mental health spiraled and I dropped out to preserve my sanity and build an educational technology platform I actually believed in, they called me the dumb one. They cut off my phone, took back my car, and told me I was dead to them unless I went back to school. I worked 18-hour days, surviving on cheap noodles and sleeping on a mattress on the floor, building my software line by line. I swallowed the heavy lump in my throat and started walking toward the side gate, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing me shed tears today. Before I reached the edge of the patio, a heavy hand clamped down on my shoulder. I turned around. It was Trent. He was Jada's husband of 2 years, and he embodied everything my parents obsessed over. Trent was a white trust fund baby who worked in finance, wore custom pastel linen suits, and spoke with the loud, unearned authority of a man who had never faced a real consequence in his life. To my parents, Trent was not just a son-in-law. He was an acquisition. He was the ultimate status symbol, the golden ticket that proved our family had transcended racial and economic barriers to secure a spot in the highest echelons of Atlanta society. He stood blocking my path to the valet, holding a half-empty glass of expensive scotch. The ice clinked loudly as he swirled the amber liquid, eyeing me up and down with a look of profound amusement. "I hear they are making you move that tragic little car of yours," he said, flashing a blindingly white smile. "You know, if you had just stayed in school like Jada, you might be driving something made in this decade. But I guess that computer hobby of yours is not exactly paying the bills, is it?" He reached into the inner pocket of his tailored jacket and pulled out a sleek silver money clip. With slow, deliberate movements meant to maximize my humiliation, he slid a crisp $100 bill from the stack. He held it out to me. "Here," he said, his tone dripping with fake pity. "Fetch me a fresh scotch from the bartender. Keep the change. I know rent gets tight when you are playing pretend entrepreneur in a basement somewhere. Go buy yourself a decent warm meal, Aaliyah." The heat of the afternoon sun beat down on my shoulders, but my blood ran ice cold. A few years ago, a stunt exactly like this would have sent me running to the bathroom to cry. I would have felt the crushing weight of being the family failure. I would have let his arrogant words validate every insecurity my parents had ever planted in my head. But today, I just looked at the bill fluttering in the warm breeze and let out a soft, genuine laugh. I did not raise my hands to take his money. I simply looked him dead in the eyes. "I do not need your allowance, Trent," I said, my voice perfectly level. "You should probably hold on to that cash. You are going to need it for legal fees very soon." Trent lowered the bill slightly, his perfectly manicured eyebrows drawing together in confusion. "What are you talking about?" he scoffed, rolling his eyes. "I am talking about reality, Trent," I replied, stepping closer to him, so our conversation stayed strictly between us. "You love to mock my computer hobby. You love to remind everyone at these lavish parties that I dropped out of college. But let us get the story straight right now. When I left school to build my educational software, my parents cut me off that very same day. I was 18 years old. They froze my bank accounts, canceled my health insurance, and threw my belongings onto the front lawn in garbage bags. They told me I would be back, begging on my knees within a month. I built my company by waiting tables for tips exactly like the one you just tried to hand me. I slept on the bare floor of a studio apartment that had no heating during the winter. I paid my own way every single step of the journey. You, on the other hand, inherited your hedge fund from a father who bought your way into Wharton. You have never built a single thing from the ground up in your entire miserable life." Trent's face flushed a deep red. He shoved the money back into his pocket and puffed out his chest, trying to use his physical height to intimidate me. "You listen to me, you bitter little dropout," he snapped, leaning in close, so I could smell the alcohol on his breath. "You have no idea how real finance works. Vanguard Elite manages hundreds of millions of dollars for the wealthiest clients in this state. I am swimming in capital while you are drowning in absolute delusion. Do not ever speak to me like we are equals again. I tilted my head, feigning a look of innocent curiosity. Hundreds of millions of dollars, I asked softly. That is so strange. Because my software maps financial infrastructure and institutional supply chains. I read a lot of raw financial data, Trent. And it is incredibly funny because just last Tuesday, the Securities and Exchange Commission opened a formal investigation into Vanguard Elite. Word on the street is that your massive fund is bleeding money, and you have been falsifying your quarterly returns to keep your anxious investors from pulling their capital out before the entire house of cards collapses. Trent froze completely still. The smug, arrogant smile that usually plastered his face vanished instantly. A visible twitch started at the corner of his left eye. His knuckles turned white as he gripped his scotch glass so tightly I thought the crystal might shatter in his hand. The color drained completely from his cheeks, leaving him looking pale and suddenly very sick. He opened his mouth to speak, to hurl another insult, but no words came out. He just stared at me, his facade of wealthy superiority crumbling into raw, undisguised panic. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously as he realized I was not guessing. I knew his darkest secret. He knew the walls were closing in on his fraudulent empire. And in that brief, silent moment of absolute terror, he realized that the dumb dropout sister he loved to humiliate was actually the one holding the match, ready to burn his entire world to the ground. Before Trent could even process the absolute destruction of his secret, the heavy silence between us was shattered by a nervous, trembling voice. "Excuse me, Mr. Sterling." It was the head catering manager, a balding man wiping thick beads of sweat from his forehead with a white cloth napkin. He held out a black leather billfold like it was a live grenade. "I am so sorry to interrupt, sir, but there seems to be a major problem with your payment." Trent snapped out of his paralyzing shock and immediately channeled his panic into blind rage. He snatched the leather folio from the man's hands. "What problem? I gave you my Centurion card an hour ago." The manager swallowed hard, shrinking back from Trent's sudden aggressive posture. "Yes, sir. We ran it 3 times just to be absolutely certain." The bank declined the transaction for the $25,000 remaining balance. The system specifically says the account has been frozen by the issuer. The word declined hung in the humid Atlanta air. A few of the wealthy guests standing near the outdoor bar stopped their conversations and turned their heads. Trent noticed the sudden shift in attention, and his face flushed a violent shade of crimson. He slammed his open palm against the marble top of the outdoor bar, knocking over a pristine stack of plastic cups. "Are you completely incompetent?" he shouted, his voice cracking with desperation. "Do you have any idea who I am? It is obviously a system glitch on your end. Run it again right now, or I will buy your pathetic little catering company by tomorrow morning and fire you myself." The manager shook his head, holding up the portable wireless credit card terminal for Trent to see. "I cannot, sir. I called the merchant line directly to verify because of the large amount. They said the accounts associated with Vanguard Elite are suspended pending federal review. I need another form of payment right now, or I have to instruct my staff to pack up the food and leave the premises." The humiliation was absolute and immediate. The surrounding guests were no longer just passively looking, they were actively whispering behind their crystal champagne flutes. My father, Desmond, had noticed the rising commotion from the main patio and was making his way through the crowd, his perfect host smile faltering with every step. Jada was standing near the melting ice sculpture, looking utterly confused as her supposedly billionaire husband humiliated himself over a catering bill. Trent frantically dug through the pockets of his custom linen suit, pulling out 2 more credit cards. Both were standard bank cards, not the ultra-premium exclusive black cards he constantly bragged about to my parents. He threw them aggressively onto the marble bar. "Try these," he demanded, his hands visibly shaking. "Just split the charge between them. Hurry up!" The manager swiped the first card. The machine beeped a harsh negative tone. Declined. He swiped the second card. Insufficient funds. Trent was hyperventilating now, his perfectly styled hair falling into his panicked eyes. He looked like a cornered animal realizing the trap had finally snapped shut. This was the man my family practically worshipped. The man who just 5 minutes ago tried to humiliate me by handing me $100 bill like I was a servant. I did not smile. I did not gloat. I simply stepped forward, brushing past his trembling shoulder. I opened my small designer clutch and pulled out my own corporate card. It was not black. It was solid gold, custom milled and heavy in the palm of my hand. I placed it gently on the portable terminal right over Trent's useless plastic cards. "Run this for the 25,000. I told the sweating manager, my voice completely calm and carrying perfectly across the suddenly silent patio. "And add a $5,000 tip for yourself. Your staff has been wonderful today, and you do not deserve to be screamed at by a man who clearly cannot even afford the suit he is wearing." The manager looked at me with wide eyes, then looked down at the heavy gold card. He tapped the screen and inserted the chip. The terminal beeped twice, processing the massive transaction. Then the small green checkmark appeared on the digital screen, illuminating the space between us. Approved. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. The wealthy socialites, the local politicians, the elite doctors, they all stared at me in absolute shock. The girl who was publicly told to move her beat-up car away from the driveway had just casually dropped $30,000 without blinking an eye. Trent stared at the long receipt printing from the machine, his mouth hanging open in silent horror. The illusion of his massive wealth was dead on arrival, and I had just bought the murder weapon. I took my gold card back from the manager and slipped it cleanly into my purse. I turned to walk away, fully intending to leave Trent to suffocate in his own public shame. But before I could take 3 steps, a manicured hand clamped down on my wrist like a steel vice. I spun around to face my mother. Vivian was shaking with a rage so intense her expensive designer hat was vibrating on her head. Her eyes were wide, wild, and entirely focused on me. She did not look relieved that I had just saved her precious party from becoming the laughingstock of the entire Atlanta elite. She looked like she wanted to physically destroy me. "How dare you!" she hissed, her voice a venomous whisper meant only for me and the immediate circle of staring guests. "How dare you pull a stunt like this on your sister's special day?" I looked down at the hand gripping my wrist tightly, then back up to her furious face. "I just paid the bill, Mom." Trent's cards were all declined. The caterers were about to pack up the food and leave your guests starving. I saved Jada's party. "You did not save anything," my mother spat, stepping closer until her heavy floral perfume was suffocating me. "You just could not stand the fact that Jada was getting all the attention today. You could not stand that she got the Harvard medical degree and the new Tesla while you are nothing but a college dropout. So you set up this little theatrical performance to upstage her. You planned this to embarrass Trent in front of our most important friends. You are sick, Aaliyah. You are just jealous and bitter." I pulled my arm free from her vicious grip, my patience entirely gone. "Did you not hear what the manager just said out loud? Trent is broke. His business accounts are frozen by the federal government. He is a complete fraud." My mother let out a harsh, mocking laugh that echoed sharply across the quiet patio. "Trent is a managing director at a top-tier hedge fund. You are a college dropout who lives in a basement playing on a laptop." She pointed a trembling finger directly at my clutch. "We cut you off years ago. We know exactly what you make. So tell me right now, Aaliyah, whose money did you steal to get that gold card? Who are you sleeping with to fake this little show of wealth?" I stared at the woman who gave birth to me. The sheer venom in her eyes was breathtaking. She was perfectly willing to accuse her own flesh and blood of theft and prostitution right in the middle of a crowded patio just to protect the fragile ego of her son-in-law. I kept my voice eerily calm, refusing to match her hysterical pitch or give her the chaotic reaction she was searching for. "I am not sleeping with anyone. Mom and I certainly do not need to steal. I own a technology holding company. That card is under my name and my corporate account. I just saved your entire event from being shut down by unpaid caterers because your golden boy could not cover the bill." Vivian let out a sharp, bitter sound that was half laugh and half snarl. "You own a company," she mocked, gesturing wildly in the air with her expensive manicured hands. A little website you run from a rented basement does not give you a $30,000 credit limit, Aaliyah. You are lying. You have always been a liar. You just cannot stand seeing your sister win. Trent is a managing director. Trent handles real wealth. You just got lucky with some tech scam and decided to come here to embarrass the only person in this family who is actually taking us to the next level. I took a step forward, closing the physical distance between us. The heavy scent of her expensive floral perfume was suffocating, but I did not back down. Taking us to the next level, I repeated the absolute absurdity of her statement, making my blood boil. Mom, his cards were just declined in front of everyone. All of them. His accounts are frozen by the federal government. Are you completely blind to what is happening right in front of your face? Trent is flat broke. Do not you dare speak about him that way! Vivian hissed, her voice rising loud enough that a few nearby guests stopped pretending to mingle and turned their heads sharply toward us. Trent is the best thing that ever happened to this family. He brought us old money connections, Aaliyah. He brought us into rooms in the city that your father and I spent 30 years trying to unlock. He is a Wharton graduate, he is brilliant, and he is the real future of this family, not some college dropout who brings nothing but shame and embarrassment to the table. She was panting now, her chest heaving under her silk designer dress. Her obsession with Trent was laid bare for anyone to see. He was the ultimate social upgrade in her eyes. He was the white Ivy League finance bro who validated their wealth and gave them proximity to the kind of power they desperately craved. She worshipped him for his pedigree, and she despised me for threatening that flawless illusion. He is so brilliant that his firm filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy on Thursday, I stated bluntly, watching the color drain slightly from her cheeks. I read the raw financial filings, Mom. He has been running a massive deficit for 2 years. He has absolutely nothing left but the suit on his back and the lies he feeds you. Vivian shook her head violently, refusing to let the reality penetrate her thick wall of denial. You know nothing, she snapped, jabbing a hard finger into my shoulder. You are an ignorant little girl playing dress-up. Trent is launching a massive new venture next month, a private equity fund that is going to double our entire net worth. We know his finances better than anyone because your father and I just secured his seed capital. The patio seemed to stop spinning. The ambient noise of the graduation party, the clinking crystal glasses, the soft jazz playing over the hidden speakers, all of it completely faded away. A cold, heavy knot of absolute dread formed in the pit of my stomach. I looked past my mother to where my father Desmond was nervously making his way toward us through the dense crowd of socialites. What seed capital? I asked, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Mom, what exactly did you do? Vivian lifted her chin, a triumphant, arrogant smirk spreading across her face. She thought she was putting me in my place. She thought she was proving my utter insignificance and Trent's supreme value. We co-signed a $5 million commercial loan for Trent's new firm, she declared proudly, loud enough for the closest guests to hear. We are senior partners in his new venture. Your father used this estate as collateral, $17 million in prime Atlanta real estate, backing the brightest financial mind in the city. That is what real generational wealth looks like, Aaliyah. That is what family loyalty looks like. We invest in winners. We do not invest in quitters. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. The sheer magnitude of their stupidity was staggering. They had handed the keys to their entire empire to a man who was actively being investigated for securities fraud. They had leveraged their beloved mansion, the crown jewel of their Black Excellence brand, to fund a sinking ship. Mom, you have to listen to me right now, I said, grabbing her upper arms, trying to force her to focus on my eyes. You have to call your lawyers immediately. Trent has hidden offshore loans. He is drowning in debt. The SEC is actively seizing his assets today. If you put this house up as collateral for a $5 million loan and his accounts are frozen, the bank is going to call in the debt. They are going to take the house. You are going to lose everything you have ever worked for. Vivian ripped her arms out of my grasp with startling force. Her eyes blazed with a fury so hot I thought it might burn me on the spot. She was not hearing a single word I said. All she saw was the daughter she hated daring to challenge the son-in-law she worshipped. All she heard was the dumb dropout questioning her flawless judgment. "You jealous, bitter little coward," she screamed, her voice completely abandoning all pretenses of high society etiquette. "You come into my home on your sister's graduation day and try to poison us against the only son we have ever truly wanted. You are a stain on this family, Aaliyah. You always have been." She raised her right hand high in the air, her palm open and rigid, ready to strike me across the face in front of the entire Atlanta elite. She put her entire body weight behind the swing, aiming to physically put me back in the tiny box she had kept me in for my entire childhood. The crowd collectively gasped, bracing for the impact. But I was not a terrified teenager anymore. Before her hand could connect with my cheek, my left arm shot up like lightning. I caught her wrist mid-air. The loud smack of skin on skin echoed across the quiet patio, but it was not the sound of her slapping me. It was the sound of my grip locking around her forearm like a steel vise. Vivian gasped in shock, her eyes widening in pure disbelief. She tried to yank her arm away, but I held her firmly in place. I did not squeeze hard enough to hurt her, but I held on tight enough to make it absolutely clear that the power dynamic in this family had permanently shifted. I was no longer the punching bag. I was the brick wall. We stood there frozen in a high-stakes physical standoff. The tension was so thick you could choke on it. My mother stared at me, her chest heaving, her perfect facade completely shattered. And right at that exact moment, Jada rushed through the crowd, her white designer dress flowing behind her like a bridal gown, stepping right into the middle of the war zone. Jada shoved her way past the frozen catering manager and grabbed my mother's arm. She positioned herself perfectly between Vivian and me, acting as a shield of white silk and feigned innocence. Tears were already welling in her perfectly lined eyes, spilling over her cheeks with practiced precision. She knew exactly how to play her audience. She had spent her entire life weaponizing her tears to get me in trouble, and today she was delivering the performance of her life. "What are you doing to her?" Jada cried out, her voice trembling with the exact pitch needed to draw maximum sympathy from the surrounding guests. She looked at my hand, which was still firmly locked around our mother's wrist, and let out a dramatic gasp. "Let go of her, Aaliyah. Have you completely lost your mind? Are you trying to hurt Mom on my graduation day of all days?" I slowly released my grip, letting my hand drop to my side. I did not break eye contact with Vivian. My mother immediately pulled her arm back, rubbing her wrist and leaning into Jada's embrace like a wounded bird seeking shelter. The wealthy guests watching us began to murmur their sympathies, clearly aligning with the pristine, beautiful graduate defending her terrified mother. "You are psychotic," Jada spat, her voice growing louder, morphing rapidly from victim to righteous defender. "We invited you here out of pity. Dad told me not to include you, but I begged him. I told him we should be the bigger people and let you see what real success looks like, so maybe you could finally get your life together. And this is how you repay us. By physically attacking Mom. By humiliating Trent over some stupid banking error." I watched my sister perform. She was entirely in her element, playing to the crowd of Atlanta socialites who were now hanging on her every word. She was the hero, and I was the volatile, unpredictable villain. Jada turned her head toward the edges of the patio, searching the crowd. "Security," she yelled, her voice shrill and demanding. "I want security over here right now. Remove her from this property. She is ruining my special day. She is ruining everything." No security guards moved. They were likely too stunned by the unfolding drama, or perhaps intimidated by the woman who had just dropped $30,000 on a solid gold card. Jada realized no one was rushing to her aid, and her frustration boiled over into pure, unadulterated viciousness. She let the sweet victim act drop completely. "You just could not handle it, could you, Aaliyah?" Jada sneered, stepping closer to me. The fake tears vanished instantly, replaced by a hard, bitter glare. "You could not stand watching me succeed. You have spent your whole life being second best, and today was the final nail in the coffin. I just graduated from Harvard Medical School. I am going to be a surgeon. I am inheriting a $17 million estate and a brand new Tesla. And what are you? You are nothing but a dumb dropout who could not even finish a basic degree at a state school. You quit because you were not smart enough to pass your exams, and now you are here trying to tear down the people who actually have the brains and the work ethic to achieve greatness." The word dropout echoed in the humid air. It was their favorite weapon. The ultimate insult they believed completely invalidated my existence. I stood perfectly still, letting her cruel words hang over the silent patio. I let her feel the temporary high of her perceived victory. I let my parents nod along in agreement, validating her vicious attack. Then I smiled. It was not a defensive smile or an angry smirk. It was the calm, chilling smile of a woman who held the winning lottery ticket and was watching someone else brag about a counterfeit dime. Harvard Medical School. I repeated softly, tasting the words. That is a beautiful achievement, Jada. It really is. The ceremonies in Cambridge are gorgeous this time of year. It is just such a massive shame about what happens next. Jada's perfect brow furrowed. What are you talking about, you psycho? What happens next is my residency. I am going to be a top-tier surgeon. Are you? I asked, tilting my head and studying her carefully. Because typically, Jada, in order to secure a residency match and actually practice medicine, you have to pass the United States Medical Licensing Examination. The boards. And according to the national database, which my educational software integrates with directly for hospital credential verification, you did not pass. I took a slow, deliberate step toward her. My voice was calm, crisp, and loud enough for my parents and the front row of guests to hear every single syllable. You failed your Step 1 exam during your third year, Jada. You barely scraped by on the retake. And then 2 months ago, you sat for Step 2. The clinical knowledge exam. The big one. The one that determines your entire future. You failed it, Jada. You failed it miserably. And because you failed it, you did not match into a single residency program in the entire country. Jada's pristine white face turned the color of ash. The arrogant fire in her eyes extinguished instantly, replaced by a hollow, terrified void. Her mouth opened, but she could not draw the breath to speak. She looked like all the air had been violently sucked from her lungs. She stumbled backward away from me as if I had physically struck her. My father, Desmond, pushed his way to the front of the circle, his face a mask of absolute confusion and rising panic. "What is she talking about, Jada?" he demanded, his voice thick with sudden apprehension. "What does she mean you did not match? We sent out the official announcements. We told everyone in our country club that you are starting your surgical rotation at Emory General next month." "She is not starting anywhere, Dad," I said, never taking my eyes off my sister. "She has been lying to you for months. She has been lying to all your influential friends. She let you buy her a custom Tesla and throw a $250,000 party to celebrate a medical career that legally does not exist. She cannot touch a scalpel. She cannot write a prescription. She is an unemployed graduate with hundreds of thousands of dollars in student debt and no legal right to practice medicine in any state in this country." Jada stumbled backward again, her expensive heels catching on the stone pavers. She bumped into Vivian, who was staring at her golden child with an expression of pure, unadulterated horror. "Tell me she is lying." "Jada," Vivian whispered, her voice trembling, her hands gripping her daughter's shoulders. "Tell me this jealous, bitter girl is lying to us right now. Defend yourself. Tell them you are a doctor." But Jada could not speak. Her silence was a deafening, brutal confession. The golden child, the supposed savior of the family legacy, was completely paralyzed under the crushing weight of her own massive deception. The crowd of elite doctors and politicians began murmuring rapidly, the scandalous truth spreading through the wealthy backyard like wildfire. Jada looked frantically around the patio, her eyes darting from face to face, searching for an escape route that simply did not exist. The perfect, brilliant surgeon was dead, and the dumb dropout had just signed the death certificate. Before I could even answer my mother's disgusting accusation, Jada shoved her way past the frozen catering manager and grabbed Vivian's arm. She positioned herself perfectly between us, acting as a shield of white silk and feigned innocence. Tears were already welling in her perfectly lined eyes, spilling over her cheeks with practiced precision. She knew exactly how to play her audience. She had spent her entire life weaponizing her tears to get me in trouble, and today she was delivering the performance of her life. "What are you doing to her?" Jada cried out, her voice trembling with the exact pitch needed to draw maximum sympathy from the surrounding guests. She looked at my hand, which was still firmly locked around our mother's wrist, and let out a dramatic gasp. "Let go of her, Aaliyah. Have you completely lost your mind? Are you trying to hurt Mom on my graduation day of all days?" I slowly released my grip, letting my hand drop to my side. I did not break eye contact with Vivian. My mother immediately pulled her arm back, rubbing her wrist and leaning into Jada's embrace like a wounded bird seeking shelter. The wealthy guests watching us began to murmur their sympathies, clearly aligning with the pristine, beautiful graduate defending her terrified mother. "You are psychotic!" Jada spat, her voice growing louder, morphing rapidly from victim to righteous defender. "We invited you here out of pity. Dad told me not to include you, but I begged him. I told him we should be the bigger people and let you see what real success looks like, so maybe you could finally get your life together. And this is how you repay us. By physically attacking Mom, by humiliating Trent over some stupid banking error." I watched my sister perform. She was entirely in her element, playing to the crowd of Atlanta socialites who were now hanging on her every word. She was the hero, and I was the volatile, unpredictable villain. Jada turned her head toward the edges of the patio, searching the crowd. "Security," she yelled, her voice shrill and demanding. "I want security over here right now. Remove her from this property. She is ruining my special day. She is ruining everything." No security guards moved. They were likely too stunned by the unfolding drama, or perhaps intimidated by the woman who had just dropped $30,000 on a solid gold card. Jada realized no one was rushing to her aid, and her frustration boiled over into pure, unadulterated viciousness. She let the sweet victim act drop completely. "You just could not handle it, could you, Aaliyah?" Jada sneered, stepping closer to me. The fake tears vanished instantly, replaced by a hard, bitter glare. "You could not stand watching me succeed. You have spent your whole life being second best, and today was the final nail in the coffin. I just graduated from Harvard Medical School. I am going to be a surgeon. I am inheriting a $17 million estate and a brand new Tesla. And what are you? You are nothing but a dumb dropout who could not even finish a basic degree at a state school. You quit because you were not smart enough to pass your exams, and now you are here trying to tear down the people who actually have the brains and the work ethic to achieve greatness." The word dropout echoed in the humid air. It was their favorite weapon. The ultimate insult they believed completely invalidated my existence. I stood perfectly still, letting her cruel words hang over the silent patio. I let her feel the temporary high of her perceived victory. I let my parents nod along in agreement, validating her vicious attack. Then I smiled. It was not a defensive smile or an angry smirk. It was the calm, chilling smile of a woman who held the winning lottery ticket and was watching someone else brag about a counterfeit dime. "Harvard Medical School." I repeated softly, tasting the words. "That is a beautiful achievement, Jada. It really is. The ceremonies in Cambridge are gorgeous this time of year. It is just such a massive shame about what happens next." Jada's perfect brow furrowed. "What are you talking about, you psycho? What happens next is my residency. I am going to be a top-tier surgeon." "Are you?" I asked, tilting my head and studying her carefully. Because typically, Jada, in order to secure a residency match and actually practice medicine, you have to pass the United States Medical Licensing Examination, the boards. And according to the national database, which my educational software integrates with directly for hospital credential verification, you did not pass. I took a slow, deliberate step toward her. My voice was calm, crisp, and loud enough for my parents and the front row of guests to hear every single syllable. "You failed your Step 1 exam during your third year, Jada. You barely scraped by on the retake. And then 2 months ago, you sat for Step 2, the clinical knowledge exam. The big one, the one that determines your entire future. You failed it, Jada. You failed it miserably. And because you failed it, you did not match into a single residency program in the entire country. Jada's pristine white face turned the color of ash. The arrogant fire in her eyes extinguished instantly, replaced by a hollow, terrified void. Her mouth opened, but she could not draw the breath to speak. She looked like all the air had been violently sucked from her lungs. She stumbled backward away from me, as if I had physically struck her. My father Desmond pushed his way to the front of the circle, his face a mask of absolute confusion and rising panic. "What is she talking about?" "Jada," he demanded, his voice thick with sudden apprehension. "What does she mean you did not match? We sent out the official announcements. We told everyone in our country club that you are starting your surgical rotation at Emory General next month." "She is not starting anywhere. Dad," I said, never taking my eyes off my sister. "She has been lying to you for months. She has been lying to all your influential friends. She let you buy her a custom Tesla and throw a $250,000 party to celebrate a medical career that legally does not exist. She cannot touch a scalpel. She cannot write a prescription. She is an unemployed graduate with hundreds of thousands of dollars in student debt and no legal right to practice medicine in any state in this country." Jada stumbled backward again, her expensive heels catching on the stone pavers. She bumped into Vivian, who was staring at her golden child with an expression of pure, unadulterated horror. "Tell me she is lying!" "Jada?" Vivian whispered, her voice trembling, her hands gripping her daughter's shoulders. "Tell me this jealous, bitter girl is lying to us right now. Defend yourself. Tell them you are a doctor." But Jada could not speak. Her silence was a deafening, brutal confession. The golden child, the supposed savior of the family legacy, was completely paralyzed under the crushing weight of her own massive deception. The crowd of elite doctors and politicians began murmuring rapidly, the scandalous truth spreading through the wealthy backyard like wildfire. Jada looked frantically around the patio, her eyes darting from face to face, searching for an escape route that simply did not exist. The perfect, brilliant surgeon was dead, and the dumb dropout had just signed the death certificate. The immediate aftermath of my revelation hit the patio like a shockwave. My parents stood completely frozen, staring at their precious daughter as if she had suddenly transformed into a stranger. But while my parents were paralyzed by Jada's betrayal, Trent was calculating his survival. He had watched his wife get exposed as a massive fraud and realized instantly that his own carefully constructed billionaire persona was next on the chopping block. He needed to silence me before I could broadcast the specifics of his own financial crimes to the influential guests buzzing around us. A heavy hand clamped down on my forearm. Trent did not bother with his charming smile or his refined socialite posture. His grip was brutal, dragging me backward away from the crowd and toward the edge of the infinity pool. I could have caused a scene and broken his grip, but I chose to let him pull me away. I wanted to see the pure desperation in his eyes without the audience. I wanted to watch the great Trent Sterling crack. He shoved me roughly toward the edge of the water, checking over his shoulder to ensure none of the guests had followed us. The ambient noise of the party felt distant here, replaced by the gentle hum of the pool filter. Trent turned back to me, his face twisted into an ugly, vicious snarl. The polished Wharton graduate was gone. In his place stood a cornered, terrified fraud. "You think you are so smart," he spat, his voice trembling with a toxic mixture of fear and rage. "You come here dropping your little corporate card pretending you are some tech mogul. You think exposing Jada makes you the winner today. You are nothing, Aaliyah. You are a basement-dwelling amateur playing in a league you do not even understand." I calmly smoothed the fabric of my sleeve where his hand had wrinkled it. "I understand exactly what league I am playing in, Trent. I am playing in the reality league. You should try visiting it sometime." Trent stepped into my personal space, trying to use his height to intimidate me. "Do you have any idea the kind of power I wield in this city?" he demanded, his chest puffed out. "Do you know what happens when you cross someone with my Wall Street connections?" Let me tell you a little secret about your pathetic software company. When you were practically begging for seed money 3 years ago, I made 3 phone calls. 3 simple calls to the top venture capital firms in Atlanta. I told them you were a volatile liability. I told them your own parents had cut you off because you were unstable. I ensured every door in the city was slammed in your face. His confession did not shock me. It only confirmed what I had suspected for years. The rejection letters I had received early on were unusually personal, citing character concerns rather than business metrics. My family had not just abandoned me, they had actively authorized Trent to sabotage my survival. You went out of your way to starve me out, I said, keeping my voice dangerously level. You wanted me to fail so I would have to come crawling back to Desmond and Vivian and validate your position as the only successful child. And I will do it again, Trent sneered, stepping closer until I could smell the stale scotch on his breath. You listen to me very carefully. You are going to walk back to that patio right now. You are going to tell everyone you made a mistake about Jada's medical boards. You are going to say your software had a glitch and you misread the database. You are going to apologize to my wife, and you are going to leave this property. Because if you do not, I will make 1 phone call tomorrow morning and crush your pathetic little software company into dust. I will have you blacklisted from every server host, every financial institution, and every tech incubator on the East Coast. I will ruin your entire life, Aaliyah. I stood at the edge of the pool, the warm breeze rippling the surface of the water behind me. I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice. I reached over to a small patio table and picked up a crystal glass of sparkling water that another guest had abandoned. I took a slow, deliberate sip, letting the cool liquid wash down my throat. The silence stretched between us thick and heavy. Trent was breathing hard, waiting for me to break. He expected tears. He expected submission. I lowered the glass and looked him dead in the eyes. I gave him a smile that was completely devoid of warmth. How exactly are you going to crush me, Trent? I asked, my tone conversational, almost bored. How exactly are you going to get Wall Street to blacklist my company when your own firm, Vanguard Elite, filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy on Thursday morning? Trent recoiled as if I had shoved a physical blade into his ribs. The smug superiority melted off his face, leaving behind a pale, sweating mask of sheer terror. He lunged forward wildly, grabbing at my shoulders in a desperate, manic attempt to physically muffle my words. "Shut your mouth," he hissed, a spray of spittle hitting my cheek. "Shut up right now before I ruin you." But I did not shrink back. I stepped out of his frantic grasp and took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the heavy summer air. Then I projected my voice across the entire patio. Are you going to ruin me with the same brilliant financial strategies you used to bankrupt Vanguard Elite, Trent? I shouted, my voice cutting through the humid afternoon like a siren. The sheer volume of my voice startled the DJ. The smooth jazz music that had been floating over the party abruptly cut off with a harsh vinyl scratch. The sudden absolute silence was deafening. Every single head on the patio snapped toward the pool. Wealthy socialites, local politicians, and my horrified parents all turned to watch the golden son-in-law desperately trying to silence the family disgrace. Trent froze, his hands hovering in midair, trapped in the paralyzing gaze of 100 elite guests. His face was a portrait of pure, unadulterated panic. "Aaliyah, what are you doing?" Desmond barked, marching toward the pool edge with his fists clenched at his sides. "Stop this nonsense right now and get inside the house. You are making a scene." "I am not making a scene, Dad," I replied, raising my voice so the entire crowd could hear every single syllable. "I am performing a public service. For years, this family has mocked me. You called me a failure. You called me a dumb dropout because I left my university program. You paraded Trent around as the ultimate standard of success. The brilliant Wharton graduate, the untouchable hedge fund manager, the man who was going to elevate our family to the highest tiers of society." I turned my gaze back to Trent, who was visibly shaking now. Sweat was pouring down his temples, ruining the collar of his custom pastel shirt. "But let us clear up exactly what my pathetic little software company actually does," I announced, projecting my words to the silent, staring crowd. I did not just drop out of school to play video games in a basement. I dropped out to build an advanced artificial intelligence infrastructure. My software maps institutional supply chains and detects deep-rooted financial fraud. We process billions of data points for federal regulators and private auditors, identifying discrepancies in trading volumes and asset declarations. A low murmur rippled through the crowd. I could see the confusion shifting into dawning comprehension on the faces of several wealthy businessmen standing near the bar. And do you want to know what my algorithms flagged 6 months ago? Trent, I asked, stepping closer to him so he had nowhere left to hide. They flagged Vanguard Elite. The data was crystal clear. Your firm has not generated a single legitimate penny of profit in over 24 months. Every quarterly report you sent to your investors was completely fabricated. Every boast you made at my parents' dinner table was a lie. That is a lie, Trent shouted, his voice cracking, pitching into a hysterical register. She is lying. She is a bitter, jealous lunatic trying to ruin my reputation. If I am lying, then why did the Securities and Exchange Commission raid your downtown offices on Tuesday? I fired back, my voice ringing with absolute authority. Why did your primary holding bank freeze all your merchant accounts this morning? Why did the catering manager just decline your black card for a $25,000 bill? The silence that followed was absolute. No one moved. No one breathed. The catering manager standing near the buffet table slowly nodded his head, confirming the declined transaction to the staring guests. You are not a financial genius, Trent. I stated the truth, dropping like a hammer. You are running a Ponzi scheme. You have been taking capital from new investors to pay fake returns to your older clients just to keep the illusion alive. And when the new money stopped coming and the entire house of cards collapsed, you are flat broke. You are drowning in tens of millions of dollars of federal debt. The crowd erupted. The polite whispers transformed instantly into a chaotic chorus of shock, outrage, and panic. Several guests who I knew for a fact had invested heavily in Vanguard Elite, upon my father's glowing recommendation, dropped their champagne glasses. One elderly gentleman actually grabbed his chest and stumbled backward into a patio chair. You funded your entire fake billionaire lifestyle with stolen money. I continued, relentless, refusing to give Trent a single second to breathe. The custom linen suits, the country club memberships, Jada's brand new Tesla, the lavish vacations to St. Bart's. Every single luxury you shoved in my face was paid for by defrauding innocent people. Vivian let out a strangled, horrified gasp. She clutched the fabric of her designer dress, her eyes darting frantically between Trent and the angry, murmuring guests. But Trent, what about the loan? She cried out, her voice trembling with rising hysteria. The $5 million. You said it was a bridge loan for a guaranteed acquisition. You said our house was perfectly safe as collateral. Trent could not even look at her. He stared at the stone pavers beneath his feet, his chest heaving, his jaw working silently as he tried and failed to formulate a lie that could save him. There was no acquisition, Mom, I said, my voice devoid of any pity. He needed that $5 million to pay off his most aggressive investors before they blew the whistle to the feds. He used your mansion. He used your entire life savings as a human shield to buy himself a few more weeks of freedom. He did not elevate this family. He financially destroyed it. The absolute devastation on my parents' faces was profound. The social empire they had ruthlessly protected, the image they had sacrificed their own daughter to maintain, was currently burning to the ground in front of a live audience. Desmond stumbled forward, looking physically sick, his hands trembling as he stared at the man he had trusted over his own flesh and blood. Trent backed away until his heels hit the very edge of the infinity pool. The arrogant, untouchable golden boy was completely gone. He was nothing but a cornered thief waiting for the sirens to approach. And for the first time in my entire life, I did not feel small in my family's backyard. I felt like a giant. Before I could even answer my mother's disgusting accusation, Jada shoved her way past the frozen catering manager and grabbed Vivian's arm. She positioned herself perfectly between us, acting as a shield of white silk and feigned innocence. Tears were already welling in her perfectly lined eyes, spilling over her cheeks with practiced precision. She knew exactly how to play her audience. She had spent her entire life weaponizing her tears to get me in trouble, and today she was delivering the performance of her life. "What are you doing to her?" Jada cried out, her voice trembling with the exact pitch needed to draw maximum sympathy from the surrounding guests. She looked at my hand, which was still firmly locked around our mother's wrist, and let out a dramatic gasp. "Let go of her, Aaliyah. Have you completely lost your mind? Are you trying to hurt Mom on my graduation day of all days?" I slowly released my grip, letting my hand drop to my side. I did not break eye contact with Vivian. My mother immediately pulled her arm back, rubbing her wrist and leaning into Jada's embrace like a wounded bird seeking shelter. The wealthy guests watching us began to murmur their sympathies, clearly aligning with the pristine, beautiful graduate defending her terrified mother. "You are psychotic!" Jada spat, her voice growing louder, morphing rapidly from victim to righteous defender. "We invited you here out of pity. Dad told me not to include you, but I begged him. I told him we should be the bigger people and let you see what real success looks like, so maybe you could finally get your life together. And this is how you repay us. By physically attacking Mom. By humiliating Trent over some stupid banking error." I watched my sister perform. She was entirely in her element, playing to the crowd of Atlanta socialites who were now hanging on her every word. She was the hero, and I was the volatile, unpredictable villain. Jada turned her head toward the edges of the patio, searching the crowd. "Security?" she yelled, her voice shrill and demanding. "I want security over here right now. Remove her from this property. She is ruining my special day. She is ruining everything." No security guards moved. They were likely too stunned by the unfolding drama, or perhaps intimidated by the woman who had just dropped $30,000 on a solid gold card. Jada realized no one was rushing to her aid, and her frustration boiled over into pure, unadulterated viciousness. She let the sweet victim act drop completely. "You just could not handle it, could you?" "Aaliyah," Jada sneered, stepping closer to me. The fake tears vanished instantly, replaced by a hard, bitter glare. "You could not stand watching me succeed. You have spent your whole life being second best, and today was the final nail in the coffin. I just graduated from Harvard Medical School. I am going to be a surgeon. I am inheriting a $17 million estate and a brand new Tesla. And what are you? You are nothing but a dumb dropout who could not even finish a basic degree at a state school. You quit because you were not smart enough to pass your exams, and now you are here trying to tear down the people who actually have the brains and the work ethic to achieve greatness." The word dropout echoed in the humid air. It was their favorite weapon, the ultimate insult they believed completely invalidated my existence. I stood perfectly still, letting her cruel words hang over the silent patio. I let her feel the temporary high of her perceived victory. I let my parents nod along in agreement, validating her vicious attack. Then I smiled. It was not a defensive smile or an angry smirk. It was the calm, chilling smile of a woman who held the winning lottery ticket and was watching someone else brag about a counterfeit dime. "Harvard Medical School." I repeated softly, tasting the words. "That is a beautiful achievement, Jada. It really is. The ceremonies in Cambridge are gorgeous this time of year. It is just such a massive shame about what happens next." Jada's perfect brow furrowed. "What are you talking about, you psycho? What happens next is my residency. I am going to be a top-tier surgeon." "Are you?" I asked, tilting my head and studying her carefully. Because typically, Jada, in order to secure a residency match and actually practice medicine, you have to pass the United States Medical Licensing Examination, the boards. And according to the national database, which my educational software integrates with directly for hospital credential verification, you did not pass. I took a slow, deliberate step toward her. My voice was calm, crisp, and loud enough for my parents in the front row of guests to hear every single syllable. "You failed your Step 1 exam during your third year, Jada. You barely scraped by on the retake. And then 2 months ago, you sat for Step 2. The clinical knowledge exam. The big one. The one that determines your entire future. You failed it, Jada. You failed it miserably. And because you failed it, you did not match into a single residency program in the entire country. Jada's pristine white face turned the color of ash. The arrogant fire in her eyes extinguished instantly, replaced by a hollow, terrified void. Her mouth opened, but she could not draw the breath to speak. She looked like all the air had been violently sucked from her lungs. She stumbled backward away from me, as if I had physically struck her. My father Desmond pushed his way to the front of the circle, his face a mask of absolute confusion and rising panic. What is she talking about? Jada? He demanded, his voice thick with sudden apprehension. What does she mean you did not match? We sent out the official announcements. We told everyone in our country club that you are starting your surgical rotation at Emory General next month. She is not starting anywhere, Dad, I said, never taking my eyes off my sister. She has been lying to you for months. She has been lying to all your influential friends. She let you buy her a custom Tesla and throw a $250,000 party to celebrate a medical career that legally does not exist. She cannot touch a scalpel. She cannot write a prescription. She is an unemployed graduate with hundreds of thousands of dollars in student debt and no legal right to practice medicine in any state in this country. Jada stumbled backward again, her expensive heels catching on the stone pavers. She bumped into Vivian, who was staring at her golden child with an expression of pure, unadulterated horror. Tell me she is lying, Jada, Vivian whispered, her voice trembling, her hands gripping her daughter's shoulders. Tell me this jealous, bitter girl is lying to us right now. Defend yourself. Tell them you are a doctor. But Jada could not speak. Her silence was a deafening, brutal confession. The golden child, the supposed savior of the family legacy, was completely paralyzed under the crushing weight of her own massive deception. The crowd of elite doctors and politicians began murmuring rapidly, the scandalous truth spreading through the wealthy backyard like wildfire. Jada looked frantically around the patio, her eyes darting from face to face, searching for an escape route that simply did not exist. The perfect, brilliant surgeon was dead, and the dumb dropout had just signed the death certificate. The illusion of my family's supremacy had been shattered, but I severely underestimated the sheer depth of their delusion. For a fraction of a second, my father Desmond had looked like a man waking up from a long coma. His eyes had widened, his hands had shaken, and he had stared at Trent with the horrified realization of a man watching his entire life burn. But that clarity did not last. To accept my words meant accepting that he had leveraged his $17 million estate for a fraud. It meant accepting that his brilliant Harvard graduate daughter was an unemployed failure. It meant accepting that the daughter he had discarded was actually the only one telling the truth. His pride simply could not process that magnitude of failure. I watched his psychological defense mechanisms kick in violently. The color rushed back to his face. The trembling in his hands stopped, replaced by white-knuckled fists. He took a heavy, aggressive step forward, physically placing his large frame between me and Trent, effectively shielding the white con artist from the staring crowd. "Are you out of your mind, Aaliyah?" Desmond roared, his deep baritone voice echoing off the stone walls of the mansion. The raw fury in his tone made several guests flinch, but I stood my ground. You come into my home on the most important day of your sister's life, and you spew these toxic, fabricated lies. You are sick. You are a deeply disturbed, jealous little girl who cannot stand the fact that you threw your own life away. I looked at him in genuine disbelief. Dad, I just gave you the exact details of his bankruptcy. The SEC rated Vanguard Elite. Call your banker right now. Check the status of that $5 million loan you co-signed. Look at the catering manager who just declined Trent's card. The proof is standing right in front of you. Shut your mouth, Desmond bellowed, taking another step toward me until we were inches apart. He pointed a rigid finger directly between my eyes. Trent is a Wharton graduate. He is a financial visionary who manages capital for the most powerful families in Atlanta. He is the man taking this family to the next tier of wealth. And Jada is a brilliant surgeon. They represent the absolute pinnacle of Black excellence. They are building generational wealth and leaving a legacy that you could never even comprehend. You are nothing but a dropout. You quit school because you were too lazy to do the work, and now you sit in a basement running some pathetic little software company that nobody has ever heard of. You fabricated this entire SEC investigation out of pure spite because you want to drag your sister down to your miserable level. The sheer level of cognitive dissonance was staggering. My father was looking at a man whose credit cards had just bounced for a catering bill, a man who was literally sweating through his suit in panic and choosing to believe him over verified federal data. He was weaponizing the concept of Black excellence to defend a white fraud who was actively stealing his money. It was a masterclass in willful ignorance. I glanced past Desmond and saw Trent catching his breath. The absolute terror in Trent's eyes was slowly fading, replaced by a sickening, creeping smirk. He realized that my parents were so desperate to maintain their social status that they would actively protect him from the truth. Jada was still clinging to Vivian, sobbing beautifully, playing the role of the martyred golden child to absolute perfection. "I am not trying to drag anyone down, Dad," I said, my voice perfectly level, contrasting sharply with his aggressive shouting. "I am trying to stop you from losing this house. I am trying to warn you that the FBI is currently dismantling Vanguard Elite. If you do not distance yourself from Trent right now, you are going to go down with him." Desmond let out a harsh, mocking laugh that sounded completely devoid of sanity. "I do not need a warning from a failure," he spat, turning his back on me to face the crowd of whispering guests. "I apologize to all of you for this disruption. My youngest daughter has always struggled with severe jealousy issues. We tried to get her help, but she refused. We hoped inviting her today would show her what hard work and dedication look like, but clearly she is beyond saving." He turned back to me, his eyes cold and dead. "You are no longer my daughter," he stated, his voice carrying a terrifying finality. "I am officially washing my hands of you. You are completely disowned. You will never step foot on this property again. You will never contact your mother or your sister. You are a bitter, toxic liar, and you are dead to this family." Vivian nodded emphatically from the sidelines, her arm wrapped tightly around Jada. "Yes," she agreed loudly. "Get out of our sight. You have caused enough damage for one lifetime." Desmond snapped his fingers, holding his hand high in the air. "Security!" he barked, commanding the private detail they had hired to manage the estate's perimeter. "Remove this trespasser from my property immediately. If she resists, call the police and have her arrested for trespassing." Two massive security guards dressed in immaculate black suits immediately pushed their way through the crowd of elite guests. They approached me with heavy, deliberate steps. I did not run. I did not scream. I did not fight back. As they reached me, each guard clamped a thick, heavy hand onto my upper arms, gripping me tightly. The physical contact was bruising, but I kept my posture perfectly straight. I looked at Trent, who was now openly grinning, standing safely behind my father. I looked at Jada, who had stopped crying just long enough to watch me get physically restrained. I looked at my parents, who wore matching expressions of righteous indignation. They had made their choice. They had chosen the illusion over the reality. The guests watched in stunned silence, parting like the Red Sea to create a clear path for the guards to march me off the patio and down the long cobblestone driveway. The heat of the afternoon sun beat down on my shoulders as they turned me toward the front of the estate. Desmond crossed his arms, standing tall as the victorious patriarch protecting his empire. But just as the guards took their first step forward, pulling me along with them, a loud, heavy mechanical grinding sound echoed across the sprawling manicured lawn. The noise was so disruptive it caused everyone on the patio to freeze. Down at the end of the long, winding driveway, the massive wrought iron gates that sealed the estate off from the main road were opening. They were not just opening, they were being forced open, bypassing the electronic keypad system entirely. Desmond dropped his arms, his brow furrowing in deep confusion. He had not authorized the gates to open. The security guards gripping my arm stopped dead in their tracks, their trained eyes snapping toward the entrance of the property. Through the opening gates, a highly coordinated convoy rolled onto the pristine cobblestone. Three identical sleek black Maybachs with heavily tinted windows glided up the driveway, moving in perfect unison. They moved with a silent, predatory grace that commanded absolute attention. The luxury vehicles bypassed the designated valet area, completely ignoring the frantic waves of the parking attendants. Instead, the convoy drove straight up to the main entrance, stopping directly at the edge of the patio where the entire party was gathered. The deep purr of their massive engines vibrated through the ground, silencing the entire estate. The doors of the lead vehicle opened with a heavy, solid click that echoed sharply across the stunned patio. The two massive security guards who had been aggressively gripping my arms instinctively loosened their hold. They were hired muscle paid to handle unruly suburban party guests, but the vehicles idling on the cobblestone belonged to a tier of power they knew better than to cross. I casually shook off their hands, rubbing my wrists, as a driver in a pristine black uniform stepped out and opened the rear door of the first Maybach. A man emerged into the humid Atlanta air. He was in his late 50s with silver hair at his temples and an immaculately tailored charcoal suit that radiated quiet, limitless authority. This was Mr. Sterling. He carried a slim leather briefcase and possessed the cold, calculating gaze of a corporate predator. He did not look like a man who attended backyard graduation parties. He looked like a man who bought and sold entire cities before breakfast. My father instantly puffed up his chest, taking a heavy step forward to intercept the intruder. Desmond was used to being the most important man in any room, and he clearly expected this newcomer to defer to him. Trent stood just behind Desmond, still sweating frantically, trying to figure out if these men were federal agents. Mr. Sterling did not even glance at them. He walked right past my father, brushing past Trent, as if they were nothing more than decorative garden gnomes. He stopped directly in front of me. The entire patio held its collective breath, waiting for the inevitable confrontation. Instead, Mr. Sterling brought his heels together and offered a deep, perfectly executed bow. It was a gesture of absolute respect, a physical submission of power that sent a collective gasp rippling through the wealthy guests. "Good afternoon, Aaliyah," he said, his voice smooth and commanding. "I apologize for the dramatic entrance, but your security protocol flagged a potential hostile environment." We mobilized immediately. Desmond's face turned a dangerous shade of crimson. The sheer disrespect of being ignored on his own property temporarily overrode his shock. He marched up behind Mr. Sterling, jabbing a thick finger toward the attorney's back. "Excuse me!" Desmond bellowed, his voice cracking with outrage. "Who the hell do you think you are, crashing my property? I do not care what kind of rental cars you drove up in. If you are here to collect a debt from this dropout, you can take her and leave. We just disowned her. She has no money and we are not paying a single cent of her obligations." Mr. Sterling slowly turned around. He did not look angry. He looked profoundly amused. He reached up with a manicured hand and calmly adjusted his silver-framed glasses, studying my father as one might study a fascinating insect. "I am not a debt collector," Mr. Sterling said, his tone dripping with polished condescension. "My name is Arthur Sterling. I am the Chief Legal Officer for Global Tech Innovations, and I am not here to collect a debt. I am here for my boss." He turned his body slightly, gesturing respectfully toward me. The murmurs on the patio escalated into an absolute frenzy. Global Tech Innovations was not just a software company. It was the parent corporation that provided predictive analytics for half the Fortune 500. It was a multi-billion-dollar enterprise, and the man in the charcoal suit had just announced to Atlanta's elite that the disowned dropout was the person signing his paychecks. Trent let out a sound that was half gasp, half whimper. He recognized the name immediately. He knew exactly what Global Tech Innovations was, because he had likely tried and failed to pitch them for his fraudulent fund. The remaining color drained from his face, leaving him looking like a chalk statue. He staggered backward, bumping into a patio heater. "You?" he stammered, pointing a shaking finger at me. "You are the CEO of GTI. That is impossible. The CEO is listed as a private holding trust." I smiled, letting the warmth of the moment wash over me. "Yes, Trent. I said, my voice carrying clearly over the stunned silence. A private holding trust managed by Arthur here to protect my identity from bottom-feeding vultures exactly like you. You thought you blacklisted me 3 years ago. You thought your little phone calls to local venture capitalists starved me out. You were so busy playing pretend billionaire in country clubs that you never bothered to check who was actually building the architecture that runs your trading platforms. Desmond shook his head violently, his brain short-circuiting as the reality of my wealth clashed aggressively with his lifelong narrative of my failure. This is a trick, he snapped, pointing a rigid finger at Mr. Sterling. You hired actors, Aaliyah. You hired these cars to put on a show because you are sick in the head. Vivian stepped back. I am calling the police right now to have all of you arrested for trespassing. Mr. Sterling did not even blink. Call them, he offered, pulling a sleek manila folder from his leather briefcase. In fact, I highly encourage it, because while I am here to ensure my client's physical safety, I also brought the finalized acquisition paperwork. He turned to Trent, his eyes narrowing into cold slits. You see, Trent, my boss was not just tracking your fraudulent activities for the national database. She was systematically acquiring the debt of Vanguard Elite. You owe $42 million to your creditors. As of 9 o'clock this morning, Global Tech Innovations owns every single one of those promissory notes. Trent dropped to his knees right there on the stone pavers, the reality of his total destruction finally snapping his legs. Jada screamed, covering her face as Vivian rushed to pull her away from her ruined husband. But Mr. Sterling was not finished. He turned his chilling gaze away from the sobbing fraud on the ground and locked eyes directly with my father. And Desmond, Mr. Sterling continued, his voice echoing over the silent patio. We need to have a serious conversation about the $5 million bridge loan you co-signed, because the house you are currently standing in was listed as collateral, and my boss just became your primary mortgage holder. The two security guards who had been aggressively gripping my arms instantly loosened their hold. Their tactical training overrode my father's frantic orders. They recognized immediately that whoever was inside those vehicles operated on a level of wealth and power that transcended suburban backyard parties. The guards took 3 rapid steps backward, their hands dropping submissively to their sides. They wanted absolutely no part of whatever was about to happen. The driver of the lead Maybach stepped out onto the cobblestone. He was dressed in a pristine black uniform, moving with military precision to open the rear passenger door. Out stepped a man who looked like he had been carved directly from a block of Wall Street marble. He was in his late 50s with silver hair perfectly slicked back at the temples and an immaculately tailored charcoal bespoke suit that radiated a terrifying quiet authority. This was Arthur Sterling. He carried a slim, leather-bound portfolio and possessed the cold, calculating gaze of a corporate predator who bought and sold entire cities before his morning coffee. He did not look like a man who attended graduation parties. He looked like the Grim Reaper for fraudulent bank accounts and fragile egos. As Mr. Sterling walked up the stone pavers, the crowd of Atlanta socialites naturally parted for him like the Red Sea. The wealthy guests who had just been murmuring their sympathies for my mother now held their collective breath, sensing a massive tectonic shift in the atmosphere. The difference between Trent's flashy leased lifestyle and the sheer monolithic corporate weight of the man walking toward us was palpable. Trent's custom pastel shirt suddenly looked cheap. The entire $250,000 graduation party felt like a superficial children's pageant in comparison. My father, Desmond, instantly puffed out his chest, taking a heavy step forward to intercept the intruder. Desmond was a man entirely accustomed to being the most important figure in any room. He owned the property. He had paid for the catering. He clearly expected this newcomer to stop deferred to his authority and explain his uninvited presence. Trent stood just behind my father, wiping a fresh bead of sweat from his forehead, his eyes darting frantically. Trent was desperately trying to figure out if this man was an elite agent from the Securities and Exchange Commission or an aggressive high-level creditor finally coming to collect on Vanguard Elite's massive hidden debts. Mr. Sterling did not even give my father the courtesy of a passing glance. He walked right past Desmond, brushing past his outstretched arm, as if my father was nothing more than a decorative garden gnome. Trent tried to straighten his posture to look imposing, but Mr. Sterling completely ignored him too, slicing through the remaining distance until he stopped directly in front of me. The patio was so silent, you could hear the ice melting in the abandoned champagne glasses. Jada's fake tears dried up instantly, her mouth hanging slightly open as she realized the spotlight had been entirely ripped away from her. Every single guest watched in absolute bewilderment as the imposing corporate titan stopped before the family disgrace. Mr. Sterling brought his heels together, his posture perfectly straight. Then he offered a deep, respectful bow. It was a gesture of absolute deference, a physical submission of power that sent a collective shocked gasp rippling through the front row of elite guests. "Good afternoon, Aaliyah," he said, his voice smooth, resonant, and carrying clearly across the silent patio. "I apologize for the dramatic entrance, but our internal threat detection protocol flagged a potential hostile environment regarding your location. We mobilized the security detail immediately. Are you unharmed?" I smoothed the fabric of my sleeve where the guards had wrinkled it and gave him a calm nod. "I am perfectly fine, Arthur," I replied, my voice steady. "I am just wrapping up some lingering family business." Desmond's face turned a dangerous shade of crimson. The sheer disrespect of being ignored on his own property temporarily overrode his confusion. The psychological defense mechanisms that protected his massive ego flared into overdrive. He could not process that this powerful man was treating his dropout daughter with reverence, so he immediately defaulted to anger. He marched up behind Mr. Sterling, jabbing a thick, aggressive finger toward the attorney's expensive suit jacket. "Excuse me," Desmond bellowed, his voice cracking with righteous outrage. "Who the hell do you think you are, crashing my property? I do not care what kind of fancy rental cars you drove up in. You do not just barge into a private family celebration uninvited." Mr. Sterling slowly turned around. He did not look intimidated. He looked profoundly amused. He studied my father with the detached fascination of a scientist examining a particularly loud insect. Desmond did not wait for an answer. His arrogance propelled him forward, eager to throw me to the wolves to save his own public image. "If you are here to collect a debt from this dropout, you can take her and leave," he sneered, waving his hand dismissively in my direction. "We know exactly what kind of financial mess she must be in to show up here begging for attention and trying to ruin her sister's special day. But let me make this absolutely clear to you right now. We just officially disowned her. She has no money, she has no future, and we are not paying a single cent of her obligations. If she owes you money, you are entirely out of luck because she is a complete, unmitigated failure." Vivian nodded enthusiastically from the sidelines, pulling Jada closer to her. "That is right," Vivian added, her voice shrill and vindictive. "She does not represent this family anymore. Take her away and deal with her debts yourself." Trent let out a shaky breath of relief, visibly relaxing his shoulders. He foolishly assumed Desmond was right. He assumed this imposing man was just another one of my problems, another symptom of my supposed chaotic dropout lifestyle. Trent actually smirked, crossing his arms over his chest, ready to watch me get dragged away by an angry creditor. Mr. Sterling did not raise his voice. He did not need to. He reached up with a manicured hand and calmly adjusted his silver-framed glasses. The quiet metallic click of the frames seemed to echo in the humid air, cutting through my father's aggressive posturing. "I am not a debt collector," Mr. Sterling said, his tone dripping with polished, lethal condescension. He looked Desmond dead in the eyes, letting the absolute certainty of his position crush my father's blustering bravado. "My name is Arthur Sterling. I am the Chief Legal Officer for Global Tech Innovations, and I am certainly not here to collect a debt. I am here for my boss." Desmond opened his mouth, but no sound came out. The humid air seemed to have been violently sucked directly from his lungs. The reality of Mr. Sterling's words struck him with the force of a runaway freight train. He stared at me, his eyes wide with a terrifying new understanding. He had leveraged his entire estate, his entire legacy on Trent's fraudulent promises to maintain an illusion of supremacy. And now the daughter he had just publicly disowned owned the very ground he was standing on. Mr. Sterling stepped back from my father, his expression perfectly blank. He turned to me and unlatched the silver clasp on his leather-bound folder with a sharp, distinct click that echoed across the stone patio. With practiced precision, he extended the portfolio toward me, resting it gently in my waiting hands. The fine Italian leather felt heavy, rich with the weight of years of sacrifice, sleep deprivation, and relentless determination. "I am pleased to inform you and the assembled guests," Mr. Sterling announced, his voice projecting across the sprawling, manicured lawn with absolute authority, "that as of 1 hour ago, the acquisition of your educational technology enterprise by Global Tech Innovations has officially closed. All regulatory hurdles have been cleared. All contracts are signed and executed." The elite guests stared at us in absolute bewilderment. They were wealthy, successful people, but they were currently witnessing a level of corporate execution that completely dwarfed their country club pedigrees. The sudden silence was so absolute, you could hear the ice melting in the abandoned crystal champagne glasses. Vivian finally found her voice, though it trembled so violently she sounded like a completely different woman. "Educational technology." She repeated, her face twisting in a painful grimace of confusion. "What is he talking about, Aaliyah? You dropped out. You sat in your basement typing on that stupid computer hobby while Jada went to medical school. You threw your life away." I looked at my mother, feeling a strange sense of pity mixed with my profound vindication. "I did drop out, Mom," I said, my voice steady and clear, carrying to the very back row of the stunned audience. "I dropped out because the curriculum was moving too slowly, and I saw a massive problem that needed to be solved immediately. I realized the National University credentialing system was fundamentally broken, outdated, and desperately vulnerable to fraud. So I spent those years in the basement writing code. I built a secure, encrypted integration software designed to verify academic credentials and streamline residency placements for medical and legal professionals. I took a slow, deliberate step toward the center of the patio where a large glass table sat surrounded by untouched expensive appetizers. That stupid computer hobby you and Dad relentlessly mocked me for is now the primary verification architecture used by 40% of universities nationwide. Every major hospital in this country uses my software to verify that the people they hire are actually licensed doctors, which is exactly how I knew Jada failed her boards. My system flagged her fraudulent applications the moment Trent tried to digitally forge them. Jada let out a strangled, pathetic sob, covering her mouth with both hands. The illusion of her brilliance was completely dismantled, leaving nothing but the hollow shell of a compulsive liar. Her pristine graduation dress suddenly looked like a cheap costume. I placed the leather folder onto the glass patio table. The sound of the heavy material hitting the glass was sharp, cutting through the thick Georgia heat like a gunshot. I slowly opened the cover. The guests in the front row unconsciously leaned forward, their eyes fixed on the documents inside, completely mesmerized by the unfolding spectacle. I reached into the folder and pulled out a single crisp piece of paper. It was a certified bank check printed on thick watermarked security paper. The corporate seal of Global Tech Innovations rested proudly in the top left corner. I held it up for a fraction of a second, letting the afternoon sun catch the metallic security thread woven through the paper. Then, with a fluid, deliberate motion, I dropped the check directly onto the center of the glass table. Time seemed to slow to an absolute crawl. It was as if a cinematic camera was dynamically tracking the faces of my family members, capturing every micro-expression of their psychological destruction. The slip of paper fluttered gently through the air, shifting back and forth before settling perfectly flat against the glass, right next to a silver tray of caviar. It was a certified check made out directly to my name, and the amount printed in bold black ink was exactly $50 million. A collective sharp gasp erupted from the crowd of socialites. It was a visceral, uncontrollable sound of absolute shock. The kind of money sitting on that table was not just wealth, it was foundational empire-building power. It was generational dominance printed on a single piece of paper and dropped casually onto a patio table. Jada literally stumbled backward, her expensive designer heels caught on the edge of a stone paver, and she nearly collapsed into a row of manicured hedges. She stared at the check with wide, terrified eyes, her entire manufactured identity dissolving into ash. The sister she had spent a lifetime treating like garbage, the sister she had just humiliated in front of her elite friends, was holding more liquid capital than Jada could earn in 10 lifetimes as a top-tier surgeon. Trent, who had managed to pull himself halfway up from the ground, saw the number on the check, and his jaw physically hit the floor. His mouth hung wide open, his eyes bulging out of his skull. He had spent years running a Ponzi scheme, lying, stealing, and leveraging other people's money, just to fake a tiny fraction of the wealth sitting casually on that glass table. He looked at me not with anger, but with the pure, unadulterated awe of a lesser predator recognizing the absolute apex of the food chain. Desmond and Vivian were completely paralyzed. They stood frozen in place, resembling two statues carved from salt. Desmond's face had drained of all its aggressive color, leaving his skin looking sickly and gray. His heavy hands hung limply at his sides, his chest barely moving as his mind desperately tried to process the impossible mathematics of the situation. The $17 million estate he prided himself on, the legacy he constantly threw in my face, was entirely dwarfed by the piece of paper resting in front of him. Vivian stared at the check, her perfectly styled hair suddenly looking out of place, her diamond necklace suddenly seeming cheap and insignificant. They had spent their entire lives worshipping the altar of success, defining human worth purely by financial metrics and public prestige. They had discarded me because I did not fit their narrow, shallow definition of excellence. They had chosen a fraudulent son-in-law and a lying daughter because those two maintained the shiny illusion of perfection. Now the universe had forcefully and violently realigned their reality. I looked at my parents, taking in their absolute devastation. There was no joy in their eyes, no pride in their youngest daughter's monumental historic achievement. There was only the crushing, terrifying realization that they had bet their entire lives on the wrong horse. They had willingly handed the keys to their kingdom to a con artist while throwing the actual architect of a modern empire out into the cold. Mr. Sterling stepped up beside me, his presence a steady, immovable force of corporate certainty. The transition of power was absolute. I was no longer the outcast daughter seeking validation from a family that despised her. I was the master of my own destiny, the owner of their debts, and the undisputed victor of a war they did not even realize they were fighting until it was already over. "Well, Dad," I said, breaking the deafening silence, my voice ringing with a calm, chilling finality. "It seems you were right about one thing. Someone here definitely does not understand how to build generational wealth." I did not give my father a single second to recover from the crushing weight of his realization. Before Desmond could draw enough breath to formulate an excuse or a demand, I shifted my gaze away from his pale face and locked eyes with Trent. The architect of my family's financial ruin was still hovering in a pathetic half-crouch, gripping the edge of a patio chair for physical support. His tailored suit was now completely soaked with nervous perspiration, clinging awkwardly to his shaking frame. "Trent," I said, my voice dropping to a conversational volume that somehow carried more menace than a scream. "Look at me." He flinched as if the sound of his name was a physical blow. He slowly dragged his eyes up to meet mine, and the sheer terror vibrating in his pupils was absolute. The arrogant smirk he had worn just 10 minutes ago when he thought I was being thrown out by security was entirely gone. It had been replaced by the desperate, cornered look of a man who suddenly realized he was standing on a trap door and I was holding the lever. "You thought you were the smartest person in the room, Trent," I continued, taking a slow, measured step toward him. "You walked into this house with your Wharton degree and your inherited country club charm, and you took one look at my parents' desperation for social validation. You saw a wealthy black family eager to solidify their elite status, and you weaponized their own aspirations against them. You played the role of the brilliant financial savior to absolute perfection. You threw around terms like generational wealth and legacy, while secretly bleeding their accounts dry to cover your own catastrophic market failures." Trent opened his mouth to speak, but his jaw just moved silently up and down. He looked frantically toward Desmond, hoping my father would step in and defend him one last time. But Desmond was paralyzed, still staring at the $50 million check on the glass table. There was no protection left. You assumed you could run your fraudulent hedge fund into the ground and use my father's estate as your personal bailout fund, I said, closing the distance between us until I was standing barely 3 feet away. You assumed no one would look too closely at the paperwork because your background and your skin color gave you an automatic presumption of competence and integrity in their eyes. You thought your privilege made you untouchable, but you made one catastrophic miscalculation, Trent. You forgot that algorithms do not care about your pedigree. Mr. Sterling stepped up silently beside me, holding a secondary file. I did not even need to look at it. I had memorized the data months ago. When Vanguard Elite began collapsing under the weight of the SEC investigation, you panicked. I stated clearly, making sure every guest on the patio heard the exact mechanics of his crimes. You started taking out aggressive high-yield personal loans to cover your margin calls, desperately trying to keep the illusion alive long enough to secure my father's $5 million bridge loan. You personally guaranteed $15 million in debt, Trent. $15 million of unsecured high-interest obligations spread across 3 private equity firms. Trent let out a ragged, suffocating gasp. His knees buckled completely, and he collapsed onto the stone pavers. The sound of his expensive trousers hitting the hard ground echoed through the silent yard. And as of 9 o'clock this morning, I continued, my voice devoid of any sympathy. Those 3 private equity firms sold those debt portfolios to Global Tech Innovations. I am not just the CEO of the company that exposed your fraud, Trent. I am now your primary creditor. You owe me $15 million. And unlike my father, I do not give extensions to con artists. I am calling in the full amount effective immediately. The remaining fragments of Trent's arrogant facade shattered completely. The polished, wealthy financier ceased to exist, leaving behind a weeping, terrified child. He looked up at me from the ground, his face blotchy and red tears streaming freely down his cheeks. He brought his hands together in a gesture of desperate supplication. "Aaliyah, please!" He begged, his voice cracking into a pathetic, high-pitched whine. "Please, you have to listen to me. I can fix this. I can liquidate my remaining assets. I can work out a payment plan. Just give me 30 days. Just give me a week. If you call in the debt today, they will seize everything. I will go to federal prison. Please, we are family. Do not do this to me." The utter audacity of the word family coming from his mouth was staggering. I looked down at him, feeling nothing but cold, clinical disgust. I glanced around the patio, taking in the faces of the guests. This was a crowd composed entirely of Atlanta's African-American elite brilliant surgeons, ruthless corporate attorneys, distinguished judges, and powerful politicians. They had worked their entire lives navigating systemic barriers to build their wealth. And now they were watching this white man who had casually strolled into their circle to steal their resources, groveling in the dirt, begging a black woman for his financial survival. The optics of his destruction were absolute. The guests stared at him with unmasked contempt. The murmurs that began rippling through the crowd were not sympathetic. They were hostile, disgusted, and unforgiving. Trent was exposed. His privilege had been stripped away and weaponized against him, leaving him completely defenseless. "We are not family, Trent," I said, looking down at his tear-streaked face. "You are a parasite. You used my sister as a prop to access my father's bank accounts. You manipulated their insecurities, and you actively tried to destroy my career because you recognized that I was the only person smart enough to see through your fragile illusion. You do not have 30 days. You do not have 30 seconds." I turned slightly, gesturing to Mr. Sterling. "Arthur, please contact our collections division. Instruct them to initiate immediate asset seizure protocols against Trent's personal accounts, his properties, and his vehicles. I want him entirely liquidated before the sun goes down." "Yes, Mom," Mr. Sterling replied, tapping a quick message into his phone. "It is already in motion." Trent let out a loud, guttural wail, covering his face with his hands and sobbing into the stone patio. He curled inward, physically collapsing under the realization that his life was completely over. He would lose his freedom, his assets, and his false reputation. He would go to prison not as a misunderstood financial genius, but as a pathetic common thief. Jada, who had been watching her husband grovel from a few feet away, finally snapped out of her paralyzed state. She took a step toward me, her hands balled into tight, white-knuckled fists. The realization that she was married to a bankrupt felon and that her own medical career was a verified lie pushed her past the point of rational thought. She lunged forward, her face twisted into a mask of pure feral hatred. Jada lunged. The pristine white silk of her custom graduation dress practically glowed in the afternoon sun as she threw herself toward me. Her face was contorted into a mask of pure feral hatred, her meticulously manicured hands curled into claws, aiming directly for my face. "You ruined my life," she screamed, the sound tearing from her throat with a raw, unhinged desperation. I did not even flinch. I did not take a single step backward. Before she could cross half the distance, the two massive security guards who had been gripping my arms mere moments ago stepped directly into her path. Their tactical training kicked in instantly, recognizing the physical threat. They caught Jada mid-lunge, their thick arms wrapping around her shoulders and stopping her dead in her tracks. Jada thrashed wildly, kicking her expensive heels against their shins. The seam of her designer dress tore with a loud, distinct rip, the white silk giving way as she struggled against the guards. The brilliant Harvard surgeon was gone, replaced entirely by a screaming, volatile child, throwing a tantrum because her toys had been taken away. "Let her go," Desmond shouted, finally snapping out of his paralyzed state. But his voice lacked its usual thunder. He looked at Jada thrashing in the arms of his own hired security, then down at Trent, who was still weeping pathetically on the ground, and finally at Mr. Sterling, who was watching the entire display with total detachment. The reality of his collapsing empire forced a sudden, sickening shift in my father's demeanor. The aggressive tyrant vanished in an instant. His shoulders slumped, his rigid posture crumbling as he desperately tried to play a card he had not used in over a decade. He raised both his hands in a gesture of surrender and took a slow, cautious step toward me. Aaliyah, Desmond said, his voice taking on a sickeningly sweet, placating tone that made my stomach churn. "Sweetheart, let us just take a breath. Let us all just calm down." I stared at him, letting the word "sweetheart" hang in the humid air like toxic smog. 10 minutes ago, I was a bitter, toxic liar. I was a trespasser to be arrested. Now, suddenly staring down the barrel of financial ruin, I was sweetheart. Desmond forced a rigid, terrified smile. "We are blood, Aaliyah. We are family. Families fight, they disagree, but at the end of the day, we protect each other. Trent clearly made some catastrophic errors in judgment. He got in over his head and he lied to us. But we do not need to involve asset seizures and liquidations. We can handle this internally." He took another step, his eyes wide with pleading desperation. "I am a wealthy man. We can figure this out as a family because we still have this $17 million estate. We can leverage the property. I can liquidate some art, sell off a few of the luxury cars, maybe downsize the guest house and the tennis courts. We will pull our resources together and we will make sure your company gets every single penny back. Just call off your collections team. Let us fix this together." The absolute sheer delusion of his proposition was breathtaking. Even now, staring into the abyss of total destruction, he still thought he had leverage. He still believed his wealth was an impenetrable shield that could fix any mistake. He truly believed he was negotiating from a position of power. I looked at my father with ice in my eyes. I let a long, heavy silence stretch across the patio, ensuring that every elite guest hanging on his every word heard exactly what I was about to say. "About that mansion, Dad," I said, my voice crisp and razor-sharp, dropping the temperature on the patio by 10 degrees. "You co-signed Trent's loan with this house as collateral." Desmond froze. The forced smile slid off his face, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated horror. "What?" "No. No, Aaliyah, that was a standard bridge loan. A temporary liquidity measure." Trent assured me the collateral clause was just standard boilerplate text that would never be activated. Trent lied. I stated cleanly, my gaze flicking to the weeping man on the pavers before locking back onto Desmond. He needed a massive injection of capital to hide his failing positions from the SEC, and he needed a clean, unencumbered asset to secure the funding. He used you, Dad. He used your absolute desperation for elite social validation. He knew you were so eager to boast to your country club friends about your brilliant son-in-law managing a hedge fund that you would sign whatever paperwork he slid across your mahogany desk. Desmond shook his head violently, taking a stumbling step backward. I read the documents. I had the lawyers look at them. You had Trent's lawyers look at them. I corrected him, my tone devoid of any sympathy. And because you were too blinded by the prospect of rubbing elbows with billionaires, you signed a cross-collateralization agreement. You did not just put up the house, Dad. You put up the vacation home in Aspen. You put up the liquid capital in your primary brokerage accounts. You guaranteed his $15 million deficit with every single tangible asset you spent your entire life accumulating. Mr. Sterling opened his briefcase again, moving with a calm, surgical precision. He produced a thick stack of legal documents stamped with red federal seals and held them up for the crowd to see. Section 4, Paragraph B of the Vanguard Elite Bridge Loan Agreement. Mr. Sterling announced smoothly, his voice carrying the finality of a judge delivering a death sentence. In the event of default, the creditor assumes immediate and irrevocable ownership of all listed collateral. Global Tech Innovations is now the sole legal owner of this property, effective immediately. Vivian let out a sound that defied description. It was a hollow, breathless shriek that seemed to tear the vocal cords right out of her throat. She dropped her designer clutch, the expensive contents spilling and scattering across the stone patio. She turned slowly to look at her husband. Her face completely drained of blood, her eyes wide with a terror so profound it bordered on madness. Desmond. Vivian whispered, her voice shaking uncontrollably. Tell me she is lying. Tell me you did not gamble our home on this boy. Desmond could not meet her eyes. He stared down at the stone pavers, his chest heaving as he struggled to draw air into his lungs. The realization that he was no longer a multimillionaire, that he was completely destitute, shattered his mind in real time. He had spent his entire existence defining his worth by his address, his cars, and his bank account. Without them, he was nothing but an empty shell. You gave him our house! Vivian screamed, her manicured socialite facade completely evaporating. She lunged at Desmond, striking his chest with her fists, her voice breaking into hysterical sobs. You arrogant fool! You gave a con artist our home to look good at the country club. We have nothing left. The guests watched the implosion with morbid fascination. The elite circle of black professionals my parents had tried so hard to impress were now looking at them with a mixture of profound pity and intense disdain. The illusion of the perfect supreme family was dead and buried. The physical altercation between my parents was deeply uncomfortable to witness. But Mr. Sterling did not possess an ounce of sympathy. He reached into his leather portfolio for a second time. The crisp rustle of heavy legal paper instantly silenced Vivian's hysterical screaming. Every eye on the patio snapped back to the corporate attorney. He produced a thick document bound with a blue legal cover, holding it with both hands as if presenting a death warrant. Mr. and Mrs. Vance. Mr. Sterling began, his tone shifting from corporate detachment to legal finality. The cross-collateralization clause was not merely a passive security measure. It was an active trigger. When Mr. Trent registered his third consecutive failure to meet margin requirements 72 hours ago, his primary lenders initiated immediate seizure protocols. Because you signed away your standard 30-day notification rights in exchange for a lower interest rate on the bridge loan, the bank was legally authorized to bypass the traditional foreclosure timeline. Desmond let go of Vivian's wrists and stumbled forward, his hands raised in a desperate, halting gesture. No. No, that is impossible. You cannot foreclose on a $17 million property overnight. We have rights. I have an entire legal team on retainer. They would have notified me. They would have stopped it. Mr. Sterling adjusted his silver frames, looking at my father with absolute ice. Your legal team was notified, Mr. Vance. Unfortunately for you, Mr. Trent was listed as your primary financial proxy. The notifications went directly to him. He intercepted the foreclosure warnings and hid them from you, hoping he could miraculously secure replacement capital before the bank seized the deed. He failed. The bank executed the foreclosure at exactly 9 o'clock yesterday morning. The collective gasp from the guests was louder this time. The sheer audacity of the situation was almost impossible to process. Desmond and Vivian had spared absolutely no expense for this graduation party. They had hired premium catering, imported vintage champagne, and contracted a live string quartet. They were currently hosting the absolute pinnacle of Atlanta high society on a property they did not even legally own. They were throwing a $250,000 party on a foreclosed estate. Trent curled into a tighter ball on the stone pavers, weeping uncontrollably. He had known. He had stood beside my father all morning, sipping champagne and accepting congratulations for Jada's fake medical degree, fully aware that the bank had already taken the house. He was just waiting for the federal marshals to show up and drag him away. Vivian staggered backward, her hands flying to her face. Her perfectly contoured makeup was completely ruined by streaks of black mascara. She looked wildly around the patio, her eyes darting from the shocked faces of her country club friends to the weeping mess of her son-in-law. Her reality was fracturing. She had spent decades cultivating an image of flawless, untouchable wealth. She had mocked her friends for wearing last season's designer shoes. She had ostracized anyone who did not meet her exacting standards of social supremacy. And now she was nothing but a bankrupt squatter entertaining guests on stolen property. Her desperate, panicked gaze finally landed on me. The transition was immediate and sickening. The vindictive mother who had just told me I was a failure and demanded security throw me off the premises vanished. In her place stood a terrified, manipulative woman searching for her next lifeline. "Aaliyah!" Vivian cried out, her voice taking on a shrill, frantic pitch. She took a step toward me, her hands clasped together in front of her chest. "Aaliyah, you have to help us. You heard what he said. The bank took our home, your childhood home. You just showed us a check for $50 million. You have the money. You can fix this. You can call the bank right now and pay off Trent's debt. You can buy the house back for us." The sheer staggering entitlement of her request hung in the humid air. She had just spent the last 20 minutes humiliating me. She had cheered when Desmond publicly disowned me. She had praised Jada for achieving a fake medical degree while mocking my actual software company. And now, without missing a single beat, without offering a single word of apology, she expected me to hand over $15 million to save her precious social status. I looked at her, letting the absolute silence of the patio stretch out for a long, agonizing moment. I wanted her to feel the full weight of her audacity. "You want me to buy the house back for you?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. "You want me to take the money I earned working 100-hour weeks, the money I bled for after you threw me out into the street, and use it to bail out the con artist who stole your legacy?" Vivian nodded, frantically oblivious to the lethal edge in my tone. "Yes. Yes, exactly. We are family, Aaliyah. I know we have had our differences, but we are blood. You cannot just let the bank take our home and sell it to some random stranger. They will bulldoze it. They will tear down everything your father and I built. You have to save it." Desmond looked up, his eyes wide with sudden, desperate hope. He actually believed I might do it. He actually thought my lingering desire for their approval would override my common sense. He took a hesitant step forward, joining his wife in her pathetic plea. "Aaliyah, please. We can put the title in your name temporarily. We can work out an arrangement. Just stop the bank from selling it." I let out a slow, steady breath. The moment I had dreamed of during those endless freezing nights in my tiny studio apartment had finally arrived. The closure I needed was standing right in front of me, begging for mercy. "You do not need to worry about the bank selling it to a random stranger." "Mom?" I said, my voice ringing with absolute crystal clarity. When Vanguard Elite triggered the default clause, the property was immediately transferred to a private corporate auction. The lenders wanted to liquidate the asset as quickly as possible to recoup their losses. I stepped forward, closing the distance until I was standing directly in front of my parents. I looked from Desmond's hopeful face to Vivian's tear-streaked cheeks. I entirely agree with you. I continued, keeping my gaze locked onto my mother. I could not just let my childhood home go to a random bidder. I could not let a developer buy this beautiful estate and tear it down to build subdivisions. So I had my holding company intervene. Vivian let out a sharp, relieved breath, reaching out as if to hug me. Oh, thank God. Aaliyah, I knew you would do the right thing. I knew you would save us. I did not save you, I stated, stopping her dead in her tracks. My voice dropped an octave, hitting them with the force of a physical blow. My holding company bought the deed from the bank yesterday afternoon. I paid the full $15 million in cash. I did not buy it to bail you out. I did not buy it to save your social standing. Desmond's jaw dropped open, his eyes widening in pure, absolute terror as the final piece of the puzzle snapped into place. I bought it for myself, I said, looking dead into my father's eyes. I own this house. I own the ground you are standing on. I own the roof over your head. You are no longer the master of this estate, Desmond. You are just a guest, and your invitation has officially expired. Vivian stopped hitting Desmond. The sudden cessation of her physical assault was almost more jarring than her screams. She slowly turned her head toward me, and her tear-streaked face underwent a terrifying instantaneous metamorphosis. The sheer survival instinct of a cornered socialite kicked in, completely overriding any sense of maternal shame or basic human dignity. The realization that I was now the sole owner of the estate, the ultimate arbiter of her future, entirely rewired her reality. She let out a loud theatrical sob that echoed across the patio, a sound so perfectly pitched for maximum sympathy that it could have been rehearsed. Then she practically sprinted across the stone pavers. She threw her arms wide and launched herself at me, wrapping me in a frantic, suffocating embrace. "Oh, my beautiful, brilliant girl!" Vivian wailed, burying her face into the shoulder of my tailored suit. Her manicured fingers dug desperately into the expensive fabric as if I were the last piece of floating debris in a turbulent ocean. I did not hug her back. I did not move a single muscle to reciprocate the gesture. I stood absolutely rigid, my arms resting loosely at my sides, letting her perform her desperate pantomime of maternal affection for the audience of stunned guests. The heavy scent of her signature designer perfume mixed with the sharp, acrid smell of her nervous perspiration. It was the scent of pure, unadulterated panic. I knew it, Vivian babbled, her voice vibrating with manufactured sincerity. I always knew you had this inside you. All those late nights in the basement, all those hours you spent staring at your computer screens. Your father thought you were wasting your time, but I knew. I knew my daughter was building something magnificent. I always saw your potential, Aaliyah. She pulled back just enough to look me in the eyes, her own eyes wide and brimming with forced tears. She reached up, trying to cup my cheek, but I tilted my head away, refusing the contact. She barely registered the rejection, plowing forward with her frantic revisionist history. "I had to be hard on you," she cried, her voice taking on a pleading, martyred tone. "Do you not see that now? The corporate world is so ruthless, so unforgiving for a woman like us. I knew you had absolute genius inside you, but you were too gentle. I had to be the villain. I had to break you down so you could forge yourself into steel. I was tough on you to make you strong, and look at you now. A titan, a CEO, I made you into this." The utter shamelessness of her lie hung in the humid Georgia air. She was actually trying to spin years of emotional abuse, endless comparisons to Jada, and her active participation in my disownment as a strategic parenting masterclass. Before I could even respond, she pivoted, her desperation seeking a scapegoat to deflect the blame. She released one hand from my suit to point a shaking, vicious finger at Trent, who was still hyperventilating on the ground. "And this absolute parasite," Vivian spat, her voice dripping with sudden lethal venom. "This disgusting, manipulative criminal. He infected our family. I never trusted him. I always told your father there was something wrong with him, but Desmond was too blinded by the country club to listen. Trent lied to us. He stole from us. He manipulated your sister and ruined her career. But you saw right through him, Aaliyah. You exposed him and you saved us from him." Trent let out a pathetic whimper from the pavers, but Vivian ignored him completely, turning her full, desperate attention back to me. "You bought the house!" she gasped, fresh tears spilling over her eyelashes. "You saved our home. I know we have had our misunderstandings, but at the end of the day, you remembered where you came from. You cannot kick us out, Aaliyah. Where would we go? The social humiliation, the society pages, they would eat us alive. We would be a laughingstock. We are your parents. We can stay here together. We can be a real family again. A fresh start, just the three of us, without these toxic liars dragging us down." She squeezed my arms tighter, her eyes begging for validation, begging for the lifeline she had spent my entire life denying me. I looked down at her hands. Her perfectly manicured fingers were clutching the lapels of my suit, wrinkling the pristine fabric. I raised my own hands and clamped my fingers around her wrists. I did not use sudden force or aggression. I moved with a slow, deliberate, and absolute mechanical coldness. I gently but firmly peeled her hands off my clothing. Vivian resisted for a fraction of a second, but the icy finality in my grip forced her to let go. I pushed her hands down and stepped back, putting a deliberate physical boundary between us. I smoothed the lapels of my jacket, restoring the flawless line of the fabric, before finally lifting my gaze to meet hers. "You did not make me strong, Mom," I said, my voice quiet, steady, and completely devoid of any emotional attachment. "I survived despite you." Vivian froze her mouth, hanging slightly open, the theatrical tears instantly drying up in the face of my absolute detachment. "Do not stand there and insult my intelligence by pretending your cruelty was some grand strategy." I continued, my words cutting through the silence of the patio like shards of glass. "You were not tough on me to prepare me for the world. You were cruel to me because I did not fit your aesthetic. I was not a cheerleader. I did not want to join your sorority. I did not care about the country club or the social register. I was an embarrassment to your perfectly curated image. You pushed me away because you could not control me, and you worshipped Jada because she was an empty vessel you could fill with your own shallow ambitions." I took a slow step forward, forcing Vivian to instinctively back away. "You did not believe in my potential," I stated plainly, refusing to let her look away from the truth. "You thought I was a failure right up until the exact second Mr. Sterling dropped a $50 million check on that table. You did not love me 10 minutes ago when Dad told me to get off his property, and you do not love me now. You love my net worth. You love my holding company. You love the fact that I hold the deed to the only thing you actually care about." Vivian opened her mouth to protest, a weak stuttering sound escaping her throat, but she had absolutely no defense. The elite guests watching from the lawn were completely silent, witnessing the total dismantling of their host. "I bought this house because it is a prime piece of real estate in a highly desirable zip code," I explained, speaking to her as if she were a remarkably slow intern. "I bought it because acquiring Trent's debt allowed me to seize a $17 million asset for a fraction of its market value. It was a hostile corporate takeover, Mom. It was not a family rescue mission." I turned my back on her, leaving her standing alone and shivering in the afternoon heat. I looked over at Desmond, who was staring at the ground, looking like a man waiting for the executioner's blade to fall. "You have until Monday morning to vacate the premises," I announced, addressing both of my parents. The eviction notices were filed concurrently with the deed transfer. My security team will remain on site throughout the weekend to ensure that no fixtures, artwork, or architectural elements are removed from the property. You may take your personal clothing and nothing else. Anything left inside the gates by noon on Monday will be considered abandoned property and incinerated. Jada broke the absolute silence that followed my ultimatum. The reality of losing the mansion, her primary stage for social dominance, was the final hammer blow to her fragile narcissistic psyche. She scrambled up from where she had been wrestling with the security guards, her torn white silk dress hanging off her shoulder like a broken flag of surrender. She shoved past Vivian, marching toward me with wild, bloodshot eyes. "You cannot do this to me!" Jada shrieked, her voice echoing off the stone walls of the estate. The sophisticated, poised woman who had glided across the patio an hour ago was entirely gone. "Do you know who I am? I am Dr. Jada Vance. I am a Harvard medical graduate. I heal people. I save lives. I am the pride of this family. You cannot just walk in here with your dirty money and disrespect me. I demand respect. I earned my place in this society." She turned frantically to the audience of elite guests, throwing her arms wide. "Tell her. Tell her who I am. I am one of you. I belong here. She is just a jealous, bitter dropout who got lucky with a computer program. She is trying to ruin my perfect day because she knows she will always be second best." I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. My quiet, calm authority completely consumed her frantic screaming. "You are not a doctor, Jada," I stated clearly, letting the absolute undeniable truth ring out across the patio. Jada froze, her chest heaving as she glared at me. "I went to Harvard," she spat. "You went to Harvard," I agreed, nodding slowly. "You graduated from medical school. But graduation does not give you a license to practice medicine. You have to pass your medical boards for that, and you did not." I took a step towards her, watching the color completely drain from her face. The elite guests standing on the lawn suddenly went perfectly still. Several prominent Atlanta physicians were in that crowd, and they knew exactly how the credentialing process worked. To claim the title without the license was a massive ethical violation. "I built the exact verification software that the National Medical Registry uses to process licensing," I explained, my voice devoid of any pity. "When Trent tried to secure a prestigious residency placement for you at Emory General, he attempted to bypass the standard background checks using his financial influence. But the system flagged your file automatically. I saw the raw data, Jada. You failed the USMLE Step 3, not once, twice." A collective murmur of shock ripped through the crowd of guests. In their highly competitive world, failing medical boards was a staggering humiliation. Lying about it while throwing a lavish graduation party was a social death sentence. "You lied to everyone." I continued, systematically dismantling her entire identity. "You stood here today accepting gifts, accepting praise, and accepting residency offers that you legally cannot fulfill. You have no medical license. You cannot write a prescription. You cannot treat a single patient. You are a complete fraud." Jada shook her head frantically, backing away from me. "No. No, that is a lie. You manipulated the system to make me look bad. You hacked the registry because you have always hated me." "I did not have to touch the system," I replied coldly. "Your own incompetence did that for you. But the failure is not even the worst part, Jada. The worst part is how you chose to cover it up. You demanded this lavish $250,000 party to celebrate an achievement you never earned. You demanded the custom dress, the vintage champagne, the imported catering. You needed everyone to look at you and worship you." I pointed a rigid finger down at Trent, who was still weeping silently on the stone pavers. "And how did you pay for it?" I demanded, forcing her to look at her pathetic husband. "You paid for it with his fake money. You funded your entire luxurious lifestyle, the designer bags, the leased European sports cars, the five-star vacations using capital stolen from innocent investors. When Trent ran out of other people's money to steal you, let him drain Dad's equity. You knowingly drained the family estate just so you could maintain the illusion that you were better than everyone else." "I did not know," Jada sobbed, her voice cracking. "I did not know where the money came from. He told me his investments were doing well." "You knew exactly what was happening," I snapped, cutting off her pathetic defense. "You saw the margin calls. You saw the frantic meetings with lawyers. But as long as the champagne kept flowing and the country club invitations kept arriving, you simply looked the other way. You are not a prestigious surgeon, Jada. You are an unemployed medical school graduate with a failed board exam living entirely off the proceeds of federal fraud. Without Trent's stolen cash and Dad's stolen equity, you are absolutely nothing." The total psychological devastation of the golden child was finally complete. Jada fell to her knees, her torn white dress soaking up the spilled champagne on the stone patio. She covered her face with her hands, letting out a low, agonizing wail that carried no authority and commanded no respect. The reaction from the assembled guests was immediate and brutal. These were people who valued genuine accomplishment and fiercely protected their professional reputations. They had been invited here under false pretenses, used as props in Jada's elaborate theatrical lie. The pity they had initially felt for my parents vanished entirely, replaced by a cold, unforgiving disgust. Dr. Marcus Sterling, the chief of surgery at Emory General, who had just toasted Jada 30 minutes earlier, set his crystal champagne flute down on a passing waiter's tray with a sharp clink. He did not say a single word to Desmond or Vivian. He simply turned his back on my family and began walking toward the valet station. His departure broke the dam. The mass exodus began. Jada's elite circle of friends, the bridesmaids she had carefully curated for their social standing and wealth, refused to even look at her. They gathered their expensive clutches and whispered furiously among themselves, casting venomous glances at the weeping bride on the ground. They walked right past her, deliberately stepping around her torn dress as they headed for the exit. "Wait," Vivian pleaded, reaching out toward a group of prominent socialites she had spent years trying to impress. "Please, Susan." "Brenda, it is a misunderstanding. We can explain everything. Please do not leave." Susan, a wealthy real estate developer, paused only long enough to deliver a look of absolute chilling contempt. "Do not ever call me again, Vivian," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the emptying patio. "You and your family are an absolute disgrace to this community." Even the hired help sensed the catastrophic shift in power. The string quartet stopped playing halfway through a classical arrangement, silently packing their instruments into their velvet-lined cases. The catering staff stopped serving, carrying trays of expensive hors d'oeuvres back into the kitchen. Within 5 minutes, the sprawling estate was entirely empty of guests. The valet station was overwhelmed as dozens of luxury vehicles were summoned at once. The loud, lively chatter that had filled the afternoon air was replaced by the sound of car doors slamming and tires rolling down the long gravel driveway. The grand celebration of Jada Vance was officially over. All that remained was a foreclosed mansion, a shattered family, and the absolute undeniable truth of their ruin. The oppressive silence that settled over the patio was completely deafening. The grand celebration had been stripped down to its ugly bare bones, leaving only the 5 of us standing in the wreckage of my parents' carefully constructed lies. Desmond stared blankly at the empty driveway where his powerful friends had just fled. Vivian was trembling, her face buried in her hands. Jada sat crumpled on the stone pavers, her ruined designer dress soaking up the last remnants of her shattered pride. I walked over to Mr. Sterling, who silently handed me a single sheet of thick legal paper. I carried it across the patio, my heels clicking sharply against the stone. I stopped directly in front of my father. He slowly raised his head, his eyes bloodshot and completely defeated. I held out the paper. He did not reach for it, so I simply let it fall, fluttering down to land squarely on his expensive Italian leather shoes. "Earlier today you told me the dumb one did not belong at this table," I said, my voice ringing with a cold, absolute finality. "You were right. You just completely misunderstood who the dumb one was." Desmond flinched as if I had struck him, but he remained entirely speechless. "That is your formal eviction notice." I continued, locking eyes with my father before shifting my gaze to Vivian and finally to Jada. "I am amending my previous timeline. You do not have until Monday. You have exactly 48 hours to vacate my property. If a single piece of your luggage remains inside these gates after that deadline, I will have my security team throw it directly into the street." Jada let out a fresh sob, burying her face in her arms, but I was already turning away from her. My attention shifted to the pathetic figure still cowering near the edge of the patio. Trent was clutching his knees, rocking back and forth in a state of catatonic shock. "As for you, Trent," I said, dropping the temperature in the air by another 10 degrees, "the SEC agents are waiting at the front gate for you." Right on cue, the heavy wrought iron gates at the bottom of the long driveway swung open. The sudden sharp glare of flashing red and blue lights pierced the gathering twilight, reflecting violently off the pristine white columns of the mansion. The rhythmic sweep of the police sirens painted the patio in alternating bursts of color, illuminating the absolute terror on Trent's face. 3 federal agents stepped out of their dark SUVs, walking purposefully up the long, sweeping driveway. They did not rush. They moved with the terrifying, inevitable precision of absolute justice. Their dark windbreakers bore the bold yellow letters of the federal government, a stark contrast to the luxurious backdrop of the estate. Trent let out a sound that was half gasp, half scream. He scrambled backward across the pavers, his expensive suit scraping against the rough stone, desperately trying to find a place to hide. But there was nowhere left to run. The illusion was over. The lead agent stepped onto the patio, his badge glinting in the flashing lights. He bypassed my parents completely, marching straight toward Trent. Without a single word of hesitation, the agent grabbed Trent by the shoulder, hauling him roughly to his feet. Trent's legs buckled, his entire body going limp as the agent swiftly pinned his arms behind his back. The sharp metallic click of handcuffs snapping shut echoed loudly across the silent patio, sealing his fate. The agents turned Trent around, marching him down the sweeping driveway toward the waiting federal vehicles. His Miranda rights were read in a sharp monotone that floated back over the manicured lawn. Vivian covered her ears, rocking back and forth, but Desmond could not look away. He watched the flashing red and blue lights paint the grand oak trees until the SUVs finally pulled out of the gates. The heavy iron doors swung shut behind them, leaving the patio in a thick, suffocating silence. The physical departure of Trent seemed to sever the last invisible string holding my father upright. Desmond's knees simply gave out. The towering, imposing patriarch who had ruled our family with an iron fist and a razor-sharp tongue collapsed onto the stone pavers. He did not weep like Trent or scream like Vivian. He simply broke. He looked up at me from the ground, his expensive suit pooling around his knees, his silver hair catching the fading evening light. His eyes were completely hollowed out, stripped of every ounce of the arrogance that had defined his entire existence. Aaliyah Desmond choked out his voice, scraping against his throat like sandpaper. "Please, you have to listen to me. Look at what is happening to our legacy." He reached out a trembling hand, his fingers hovering inches from my shoes, but he did not dare touch me. "We were the pinnacle of black excellence in this city," he pleaded, his words tumbling out in a desperate, frantic rush. "I built an empire from absolute scratch. I gave you girls a life I could only dream of. Generational wealth, Aaliyah. That is what I always preached. That is what we are supposed to protect. We were a dynasty. You cannot just let them erase us. You cannot let the Vance name turn into a cautionary tale." He took a ragged breath, trying to summon the ghost of his former authority. "You have the capital now," he continued, his eyes darting frantically. "We can combine your resources with my contacts. I still know everyone on the board. I still have the network. We can rebuild the Vance legacy together. We can keep the estate in the family and show everyone that we cannot be broken. Please, Aaliyah, do not destroy the generational wealth we worked so hard to build." I looked down at the broken man on the patio. He was still clinging to the buzzwords that had masked his toxicity for decades. He still believed that a zip code and a bank account could excuse a lifetime of emotional abuse and conditional love. He thought he could barter his way back into my life using the very concepts he had once used to cast me out. I adjusted my grip on my briefcase, my posture perfectly straight. The cool evening breeze swept across the patio, lifting the tension away and leaving behind absolute clarity. "I am building generational wealth, Dad," I said, my voice steady, carrying the absolute certainty of a woman who had finally claimed her own power. "I am just making sure the toxic generation is not part of it." I did not wait to see if my father had a response. His mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. The illusion of his supreme authority was entirely shattered, leaving behind nothing but a hollow shell of a man who had gambled his family on a fraud. I turned my back on him. I turned my back on all of them. The absolute chaos erupted almost instantly the moment I began walking away. Vivian suddenly shrieked, launching herself at Desmond. Her voice was shrill and jagged as she blamed him for trusting Trent, for risking her social standing, and for losing the estate. Desmond shouted right back, his deep voice cracking as he accused her of blindly enabling Jada's lavish spending just to show off to her country club friends. The flawless, aristocratic united front they had maintained for decades dissolved into a vicious, ugly screaming match right there on the stone patio. Down on the manicured lawn, Jada was completely inconsolable. She crawled forward on her hands and knees, her ruined designer gown dragging through the damp grass. She wailed Trent's name as the federal agents firmly pressed his head down and shoved him into the back of the dark SUV. The heavy door slammed shut with a definitive thud that made Jada collapse onto her stomach, sobbing into the dirt. Her perfect wedding, her fake medical career, and her stolen fortune were all completely erased. I did not stop to watch the wreckage. I kept my head held high, my posture rigid and unbothered. I walked down the long, sweeping driveway with confident, measured strides. The sharp, rhythmic click of my heels against the pavement was the only sound I focused on. With every single step I took, the suffocating weight of my childhood simply melted away. The constant need for their approval, the desperate attempts to prove my worth, the crushing feeling of never being enough, it all vanished into the cool evening air. I was finally free. At the end of the driveway, just beyond the heavy iron gates, my sleek black Maybach was waiting. Mr. Sterling stood perfectly straight beside the rear passenger door. He did not say a word about the scene we were leaving behind, but the respectful, approving nod he gave me spoke volumes. He reached out and pulled the heavy door open seamlessly. I stepped inside, sinking into the plush, soft leather seat. Mr. Sterling closed the heavy door behind me, instantly cutting off the distant sounds of my parents fighting and the fading wail of the police sirens. The interior of the car was a sanctuary of absolute peace and quiet control. "Take us back to the city, Mr. Sterling," I said, my voice remarkably steady and clear. The powerful engine purred to life, and the Maybach glided smoothly down the street. I looked out the tinted window, watching the grand iron gates and the towering white columns of the estate shrink into the distance until they disappeared into the shadows completely. I was leaving the burning bridge of my past behind me. I had finally claimed my own narrative, built my own empire, and my future belonged entirely to me. The harsh, flashing lights of the police cruisers fade seamlessly, blending into the warm, ambient glow of my downtown penthouse. The camera smoothly pulls back, revealing the sweeping panoramic view of the Atlanta skyline spread out behind me through floor-to-ceiling glass. I am standing by the dark marble island, exactly where this story began, holding a heavy crystal glass of aged bourbon. I take a slow, deliberate sip, savoring the sharp, rich burn as it slides down my throat. The stark contrast between the chaotic ruin of that evening and the absolute serene peace of my current reality is incredibly intoxicating. The aftermath of that night was swift and utterly merciless. Without Trent's stolen capital, and with the estate legally seized by my holding company, Desmond and Vivian were stripped of their false empire overnight. The generational wealth my father constantly bragged about vanished like smoke. They were forced to downsize into a cramped run-down two-bedroom rental on the far outskirts of the city. Their elite country club memberships were immediately revoked, and the high society friends they had spent decades trying to impress stopped returning their calls altogether. Desmond tried to leverage his old business contacts, but his name had become completely toxic. They live in total isolation, now consumed by the bitter, agonizing reality that the daughter they discarded is the one who owns the city they were exiled from. Jada faced a reality check that absolutely shattered her narcissistic delusion. Stripped of her fake medical residency and exposed as a total fraud to the entire National Medical Registry, she was permanently blacklisted from every hospital network in the state. Today, the former golden child works a miserable, soul-crushing administrative job at a low-budget insurance call center. She spends 40 hours a week trapped in a cubicle answering phones, trying to scrape together enough money to pay off the massive $250,000 medical school loans she took out for a license she will never hold. She lives in a tiny, dingy apartment entirely alone without the luxury and praise she craves. And Trent is exactly where he belongs, sitting in a maximum security federal penitentiary, serving a 20-year sentence for massive wire fraud and embezzlement. He traded his custom-tailored luxury suits for a standard-issue orange jumpsuit, his smooth-talking charm completely useless behind heavy iron bars. I walked toward the massive glass window, looking down at the glittering city lights below. I built an empire with my own two hands, using the very intellect they constantly ridiculed. I turn around, walking slowly toward the camera until I am looking directly into the lens. My gaze is steady, my voice perfectly calm, and carrying the heavy, undeniable weight of absolute victory. They mocked me for being the dumb one. But the smartest thing you can ever do is let your enemies think they are winning right until you take everything they love. Never underestimate the quiet ones. The screen cuts sharply, fading instantly to absolute black. A heavy, upbeat, empowering hip-hop track drops, shaking the silence with a deep, resonating bass line.